Welcome, welcome. You're here at Super Harry. Today we present to you, Harry collapsed in Knockturn Alley at age 9 and woke up as Lord of 41 Houses and true King of Britain. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Alley That Remembers. The thing about Knockturn Alley was that it smelled like secrets going bad. Harry had figured that out within about 30 seconds of stumbling into it, when the cramped, leaning buildings had swallowed the grey London daylight and replaced it with something dimmer and older, like light that had been used too many times. The shops here had no cheery painted signs. They had plaques, dark wood with tarnished brass lettering, names like Borgin and Burke's and Crabbed Wand Restorations, and one that just said cursed, by appointment, in letters that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Harry was 9 years old. He had £4.37 in his jacket pocket, and he had no idea where he was. That was only half true, actually. He knew where he was geographically: London, South Bank area, the strange cobblestone district that most people walked past without seeing, the one you could only find if you already knew it was there, or if you were, in some way he didn't have words for yet, called. What he didn't know was how he'd gotten here. He remembered being at the Dursleys'. He remembered Dudley's birthday, and the cake Aunt Petunia had made, which Harry was told he would not be getting any of, and he remembered the way Uncle Vernon had looked at him across the dinner table with that specific brand of contempt that had stopped bothering Harry around age 6. He remembered going to bed. He did not remember waking up, getting dressed, or walking the 12 miles between Privet Drive and this alley. His feet hurt, so presumably he had walked, but the memory simply wasn't there, which was either alarming or interesting depending on how you looked at it, and Harry, largely because the alternative was sitting down and crying, had decided to find it interesting. He moved carefully through the alley, keeping to the edges, watching. The witches and wizards here, and they were witches and wizards, he could tell without knowing how he could tell, in the same instinctive way he'd always known things he wasn't supposed to know, mostly ignored him. A few glanced at his forehead with expressions that flickered too fast to read. One old woman in a moth-eaten green cloak stared at him openly until Harry stared back, and then she turned and hurried away at a pace that seemed urgent for someone using a walking stick. The headache started small, behind his left eye. By the time he'd passed 3 more shops it had spread to both temples and begun doing something creative with his spine. Harry stopped walking and pressed his back against the nearest wall, cold stone, faintly damp, and breathed through his nose. The headache wasn't pain, exactly, or it wasn't only pain. It felt like pressure, like something inside his skull had grown larger than the skull could accommodate and was politely but insistently requesting more room. A sound reached him, underneath the usual noise of the alley. It was deep and rhythmic, like a heartbeat that wasn't his, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Or possibly from inside him, he couldn't tell. Air, something said. Not a voice, not exactly. More like a vibration in his bones that happened to carry meaning. Yeah, Harry said, under his breath, because talking to inexplicable bone vibrations seemed as reasonable as anything else at the moment. That's vague. Could you be more specific? The pressure tripled. Harry's knees made a unilateral decision to stop holding him up. He was dimly aware of hitting the cobblestones, of his glasses skidding a few inches away, of the alley continuing its business around him with the particular indifference of places that have seen far stranger things. The last thing he registered before the darkness came up to meet him was the sound of small, deliberate footsteps, unhurried, precise, and a voice that was dry and amused and entirely unimpressed. Well, the voice said, in clipped, accented English. Found one, then. He woke up in a chair. Not on a floor, not in a bed, a chair, high-backed and leather, positioned in front of a desk so large it might technically have qualified as a geographic feature. The room around the desk was lit by lamps that burned without flames, casting a warm golden light across walls lined with filing cabinets that stretched floor to ceiling. The floor was marble. The ceiling was vaulted and carved with figures Harry couldn't quite make out without his glasses. His glasses were on the desk. Folded neatly. He picked them up, unfolded them, put them on. The figure behind the desk came into focus. The goblin was old in the way that certain things were old, stones and river beds and grudges, with a density to his age that made the air around him feel slightly heavier. He was dressed in the formal banker's attire Harry had seen on the tellers in Diagon Alley, but better, sharper, with small medals on his lapel that caught the lamplight. His fingers, long and knuckled and very still on the desktop, held a quill that he hadn't been writing with. He'd been waiting, the quill held precisely, the way a conductor holds a baton. Behind him, on the wall, was a brass nameplate, Knockturn. Head of Inheritance and Treaty Division. "You're awake," Knockturn said. "Good. I have questions." "I have questions too," Harry said. His voice came out steadier than he felt, which seemed like a reasonable achievement under the circumstances. "Did you bring me here?" "I had you brought here." "There's a distinction." Knockturn tilted his head slightly. "You collapsed in Knockturn Alley. My staff recovered you before the curious crowd could become a problem." "Do you know why you collapsed?" Harry thought about the heartbeat that wasn't his heartbeat, and the pressure, and the word that wasn't a word. "Not exactly," he said. I think something was trying to wake up." Knocktur's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, a fractional shift toward attention. "Tell me your full name." "Harry. Harry James Potter." The stillness in the room changed quality. It became the kind of stillness that happens just before something very loud. Knockturn set down his quill, slowly and with great deliberation, the way you set down something you might otherwise snap in half. He folded his hands. He looked at Harry across the vast expanse of desk with eyes that were amber and ancient and suddenly, ferociously alert. "Harry James Potter," he repeated. "Son of James Charles Potter and Lily Potter née Evans." "Yes." "Age 9. "Yes." Knockturn was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. Then he reached across to his left, opened a filing cabinet without looking, the drawer opened before his fingers reached it, as if it recognized the gesture, and withdrew a folder that was so thick it landed on the desk with a sound like a judge's gavel. "We have been waiting," Knockturn said, opening the folder to a page that was dense with names and bloodlines rendered in red and gold ink, "for a very long time, Mr. Potter. Or rather," he paused, running a finger down the page, "I should say, my lord." Harry looked at the folder. He could see his name at the top of the page, and below it, branching outward in a genealogical tree that kept branching and branching until it ran off the edges of the paper and apparently onto additional pages. "What is that?" "Your inheritance profile. Generated the moment you entered Gringotts." Knockturn turned the folder so Harry could see it better. "We generate these for every significant magical heir who enters our building. Most of them produce modest results. 2 or 3 houses, perhaps, for the old families. Some produce nothing at all." He tapped the thick folder. "Yours generated 47 pages. The number landed somewhere in Harry's chest and sat there, heavy and specific. 47 pages. 47 pages. Knocktur's tone was not awe, because goblins didn't do awe. It was something more businesslike, but with an edge to it that might, in a different species, have been satisfaction. "You are the confirmed heir of 41 magical houses, Mr. Potter. 14 ancient and noble, 9 noble, 11 ancient, and 7 lesser houses whose bloodline claims nonetheless carry significant weight under Goblin Treaty law." He turned another page. "You also carry a designation that has not appeared in this bank's records in 412 years. He turned the folder fully toward Harry and pointed to a line near the top of the page, written in gold so bright it seemed to glow slightly in the lamplit room. "True heir, royal bloodline, Britannic magical sovereignty." Harry read it twice. Then he read it a third time, because it seemed like the kind of thing that deserved a third reading. Then he looked up at Knockturn. "I'm going to need you to explain what that means." "It means," Knockturn said, with the efficient precision of someone who has rehearsed this, "that you carry in your blood the unbroken lineage of the original magical sovereigns of Britain. Before the Ministry of Magic. Before the Wiesengemot. Before the International Statute of Secrecy. The magical sovereignty of these islands recognized a bloodline as its steward. That bloodline has been dormant, fragmented through marriages, deaths, and deliberate suppression, for 4 centuries. It has now converged again. He paused. In you. In me, Harry said. In you. Harry leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, at the carved figures he could now make out more clearly. They were goblins and wizards, together, signing something, the Gringotts Charter probably, the oldest magical agreement in Britain. He looked at it for a long moment. Okay, he said. Nagnok blinked. Okay. Okay, as in, I understand. Or I'm starting to. And I want to understand more. Harry brought his gaze back down to the goblin's face. So what does inheriting 41 houses actually mean? What do I have? What can I do? And what does the royal bloodline designation change? Nagnok stared at him for a moment with the expression of someone who had prepared for tears, shock, denial, and demands to call a guardian, and was now recalibrating. Then he nodded, once, and picked up his quill again. Practical questions. Good. Let us begin. For the next 2 hours, Harry sat in that chair and learned. He learned it the way he'd always preferred to learn things, by asking, listening, asking again when the answer was incomplete, pushing back when something didn't add up. Nagnok, for his part, seemed to appreciate this. He explained things once, clearly, without condescension, and when Harry caught an inconsistency in the dates on one of the inheritance charts, the goblin paused, checked, corrected the record, and then looked at Harry with an expression that might have been respect. The 41 houses. Some of them Harry had heard of, Potter, obviously, and Black, in a vague way, and Peveril, from some half-remembered dream he'd had once about 3 brothers and a road. Others were entirely unknown to him, House Gaunt, whose magical line had fractured into madness and produced something that Nagnok mentioned only briefly, with a careful neutrality, House Slytherin, which made Harry go still for a moment, Houses Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff, which made him go stiller, and 36 others ranging from the merely old to the ancient and slightly terrifying. Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff, Harry said, staring at the names. All 4. The founders' bloodlines converged through a series of marriages and inheritance transfers over several centuries, Nagnok confirmed. It was not accidental. There is evidence in the vault records that certain members of each line understood what they were doing, ensuring the bloodlines would eventually converge in a single heir. He paused. You are the result of several generations of deliberate magical engineering, Mr. Potter. And several generations of deliberate interference to prevent exactly this. Who interfered? Nagnok considered his answer with the care of someone choosing the correct tool for a delicate job. Certain powerful interests, he said finally, have benefited enormously from the absence of a true sovereign. The Ministry of Magic holds power it was never designed to hold. It was created as an administrative body, not a governing one. The difference matters. He turned a page. Individuals in the ministry, and in certain old families, have known for decades that the convergence was possible. Several took steps to prevent it. The names Nagnok then named were careful, delivered without embellishment, and Harry listened to every one of them and filed them away in the part of his mind where he kept the things that mattered. The inheritance itself, what it meant practically. 41 vaults in Gringotts, ranging from the modest account of a minor house that hadn't had an active heir in 60 years to the primary Potter vault, which Nagnok described as substantial, with the careful tone of someone who means extraordinary. The sum total of the holdings was, Harry gathered, the kind of number that rewrote the meaning of the word rich. He had properties across Britain and Europe. He had a seat, had many seats, 41 of them across various structures, on the Wiesengemot. He had political authority that, under the old charter law that predated the ministry's own founding documents, superseded ministerial authority in certain cases. What certain cases? Harry asked. Matters of blood law. Matters of house treaties. Matters that touch on the ancient magical accords. Nagnok tilted his head. And, under the specific provision of the sovereignty clause of the original royal charter, which has never been formally repealed, merely ignored, matters of national magical governance. Harry turned this over. So the ministry can't actually legally override me on those things. Correct. Does the ministry know that? The ministry, Nagnok said, has been hoping very hard that this situation never arose so they would never have to find out. Harry almost smiled. Can I access my vaults today? All of them? Nagnok produced a form from somewhere. The inheritance must be formally accepted first. It requires a blood rite, not painful, not complex, but binding. Once you accept, the magic of the houses recognizes you. You cannot unaccept. He set the form on the desk. The primary vault will be accessible immediately. The others will open on a schedule based on the complexity of their inheritance laws, some within the hour, some within days. What happens to the Dursleys' access to my trust vault? Harry asked. The question was quiet and specific. They've been drawing from it, I think. For my upkeep, they said. Nagnok's expression was perfectly still. They have been drawing from the Potter Educational Trust, a sub-vault distinct from the primary vault, at a rate that considerably exceeds any reasonable definition of upkeep. He opened a different section of the folder. Over 9 years, the withdrawals amount to, I don't need the number right now, Harry said. I just need to know, can you block further access? The moment you accept the inheritance, all access rights to all Potter vaults revert to you exclusively. Anyone with existing access codes loses them. Nagnok paused. Retroactive legal claim for misappropriated funds is a separate process. We'll come back to the retroactive claim, Harry said. Let's do the right. It was a small knife, barely a knife at all, more like a silver instrument, and the cut it made in Harry's palm was shallow and precise and healed over within seconds. The blood that welled up was, very briefly, and Harry was certain he hadn't imagined this, gold. He pressed the bloody palm to the acceptance seal on the document, and the room moved. Not physically. But the room moved, the way a chest moves when the person inside it takes a deep breath. Every lamp brightened momentarily. The filing cabinet drawer that held his folder opened and closed on its own, just once, like punctuation. The carved figures on the ceiling, Harry looked up, seemed to lean forward slightly, toward him, and then settle back. And inside him, something that had been pressing against the inside of his ribs since he was small enough to be unaware of it, something that had expressed itself in every strange thing that had ever happened around him, the vanishing glass at the zoo, the hair that grew back overnight, the teacher's wig, the mysteriously appearing food on nights when Aunt Petunia forgot to lock the cupboard, that something exhaled. It felt like finally standing up straight after years of walking hunched. Well, Nagnok said, looking at his instruments with an expression Harry was learning to identify as satisfaction. That's done, then. 41 houses. Accepted, confirmed, bound. He made a note in the folder. The royal designation has also activated. The bank will log this formally. What does the activation feel like? From your instrument's perspective? Nagnok looked at the instruments, which were still faintly registering. It reads, he said, slowly, as if the magical substrate of Britain just updated its records. Harry looked at his hand. The cut was completely gone. Not scarred over, gone, as if it had never been made. He flexed his fingers once, then looked at Nagnok. I need 2 things from you before I leave today. Only 2. Today. There'll be more. Harry met the goblin's amber eyes steadily. First, I need a full accounting of everything, all 41 vaults, all properties, all ongoing contracts and treaties under the house names. I don't need it today, but I need it before the week is out. It will take 3 days to compile properly. For if you want it thorough. 4 days, thorough. Harry nodded. Second. I've heard that Gringotts operates under its own law, independent of the ministry. We do. So communications routed through Gringotts, through official house correspondence channels, cannot be intercepted or monitored by the ministry. Nagnok was very still. That is correct. I'm going to need to make contact with someone. I need you to route a letter to Arcturus Black. He paused. House Black. Is he still alive? Something shifted in Nagnok's expression, brief, quickly controlled. Lord Arcturus Black is alive. He is elderly and has not been publicly active for some years, but he is alive. The goblin's head tilted slightly. You know of him? I know he's been researching the Convergence bloodline. I know from the vault records that there have been communications between the Potter and Black accounts regarding inheritance matters over the past several decades. Harry had seen it in the folder, brief notes, flagged and marked in a way that suggested they weren't accidental. I think he's been waiting for something. He has been waiting, Nagnok confirmed, with a care that said he was choosing every word, for something very like you. Then write to him, Harry said. From me. Tell him that the heir has accepted his inheritance and wishes to meet. He thought for a moment. Tell him I prefer his house to mine. I want to see how he keeps it. Nagnok had the look of a man suppressing something. And if he asks your name? He'll know it the moment the letter reaches him. House magic recognizes itself. Harry stood up from the chair, and for a moment Nagnok looked, not startled, exactly, but recalibrated again, because Harry standing didn't look like a 9-year-old standing. It looked like something taller, something that occupied the room differently. How do I access the primary vault today? I'm going to need some money. How much? Harry considered. He had £4.37, no proper clothes, and a situation that was going to require him to operate independently of the Dursleys for the foreseeable future. Let's say 100 galleons to start. Is that reasonable? That is extremely modest given the vault's contents, Nagnok said, with a tone that suggested he found this simultaneously admirable and baffling. I'll revise upward when I understand what I'm doing with it, Harry said. I don't like spending money I haven't accounted for. Nagnok stood, which brought him to about Harry's shoulder height, and looked at him with those amber eyes for a moment. Then he did something Harry would later learn was extremely unusual for a goblin in a formal professional context. He inclined his head, not a nod, but a bow, small, precise, entirely intentional. Your vault is on level 7, Nagnok said. I will personally escort you. The cart ride was the best thing Harry had experienced in 9 years, and he would have enjoyed it more if he hadn't been busy thinking. The wind hit his face and the darkness rushed past and the tracks twisted and plummeted and he held the side of the cart with one hand and thought about 41 houses and a royal bloodline and a ministry that had been quietly terrified of exactly this for decades. He thought about the Dursleys and the money they'd been taking and the cupboard under the stairs where he'd spent more nights than he liked to count. He thought about Sirius Black, whose name had appeared in 3 different places in the inheritance folder, named heir of House Black, named godfather on a Potter document dated 1981, and flagged in a Gringotts legal notation that said current status, Azkaban, no trial held. No trial held. Harry had read that and set it aside in the way you set aside a very hot coal, carefully, quickly, not forgetting its location. Level 7 was deeper than Harry expected, and colder, and the vault door was not a door but a cliff face of metal, ancient and dark and engraved with the Potter crest, a stag, rampant, surrounded by a ring of small symbols Harry didn't yet have names for. Nagnok pressed his hand to the metal, there was a sound like every lock in existence disengaging simultaneously, and then the cliff face swung back. Harry looked at what was inside. He was quiet for a moment. Then, right. So the 100 galleons is, extremely modest, Nagnok confirmed, from behind him. It was not the gold that hit Harry first, though there was gold enough to fill several very ambitious swimming pools, and not the artifacts, though there were artifacts here that made the items in the Hogwarts trophy case look like charity shop donations. It was the weight of it. The sense of time, decades and centuries of accumulated something, wealth, yes, but also history, also intention. Things had been put here deliberately. People had brought objects here that they wanted to preserve, to pass on, to mean something. Every item was someone's thought about the future. He was the future they'd thought about. He picked up one galleon from the nearest pile and looked at it. Turned it over. The gold caught the lamplight. One thing, Harry said, not turning around. The vault that was flagged under the Sirius Black notation. The legal hold that was placed on his access. Yes. Who placed it? A pause. It was placed by Albus Dumbledore, acting under an emergency ministry authority in November 1981. It froze the Black accounts accessible to Sirius Orion Black and redirected his appointment as your guardian to one Vernon Dursley, citing, Nagnak's voice was very careful and very neutral, concerns about Sirius Black's mental stability. Harry put the galleon down. He breathed in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts, and he made sure that whatever he was feeling did not reach his face, because Nagnak was watching him and Harry was beginning to understand that how you handled information in front of people like Nagnak was part of every test that mattered. Was there a formal medical evaluation to support those concerns? He asked. There was not. Was there a Wiesengemot order? There was not. It was a ministerial emergency provision, signed by Dumbledore in his capacity as Chief Warlock, and countersigned by Bartemius Crouch Sr., so it was illegal, Harry said. Under Goblin Treaty law, and under several provisions of the old Charter law you now hold authority over, yes, it was. Harry turned around. His face was perfectly calm. He gathered 100 galleons into a pouch Nagnak had provided, pulled the cord, and looked at the goblin. Add it to the accounting. I'll want all documentation related to that action in the report. Of course, my lord. And Nagnak. Harry paused at the vault entrance. Thank you. For picking me up off the street. For the chair. For explaining things properly. He said it simply, without performance, the way he would have said anything true. I don't take it for granted. Nagnak was still for a moment. We treat our clients according to their account status, he said, which was the official answer. Then, quietly, he added, but some clients are easier to work for than others. They came back up through the dark on the rattling cart, and the gold-lit interior of Gringotts received them at the top, marble floors and towering ceilings and tellers conducting the ordinary business of the wizarding world's wealthiest institution. Harry walked through it differently than he'd walked through Knockturn Alley. Not slowly, not showy. Just directly, with the specific quality of movement that meant he knew where he was going and was on his way there. At the door, Nagnak handed him a sealed letter to carry to Arcturus Black, with the formal Gringotts seal in red wax, and a small card with a number on it. If you need to contact me before the 4-day report is ready, the goblin said. Use the tap code on the reverse side. I'll learn it tonight. I don't doubt it. Nagnak folded his hands. A word of advice, unsolicited. Please. Several people in this city are already aware that something shifted in the magical substrate today. The inheritance acceptance produced a signature. Most of them won't know what it was. He paused. But some will. Be careful who you speak to before you have your footing. How long do I have, do you think? Nagnak's expression was thoughtful. Albus Dumbledore has people everywhere. I would estimate 3 days before he makes inquiries. Harry considered this. That's enough time. He stepped out of Gringotts into the mid-afternoon sunlight of Diagon Alley, squinting slightly, and he stood there for a moment on the white steps while the magical world moved around him, witches and wizards going about their afternoon errands, none of them looking at him because he was small and young and unremarkable, and none of them knowing that the thing that had been dormant in the bedrock of their world for 400 years had just opened its eyes. He bought clothes first, practical, well-made, nothing flashy. A trunk with a decent locking charm. Books, 3 of them, The Governance of Magical Britain, A History, Ancient House Magic and Its Obligations, and a slim volume titled Bloodline Law and the Old Charter, which the bookshop owner looked at him oddly for purchasing, as if he'd bought something slightly dangerous. Then food, because he was 9 years old and had not eaten since yesterday's dinner, which had not been generous. He sat in a small cafe at the quieter end of the alley and ate a sandwich and drank tea and read the first 20 pages of the governance history while the afternoon stretched toward evening, and he looked like nothing so much as an ordinary small boy doing quiet ordinary things. Inside him, 41 houses were waking up. He could feel them, faintly, like fires being lit in distant rooms of a vast dark mansion. Each one different, the cool, old silver quality of Peveril, the sharp crackling energy of Slytherin, the steady golden warmth of Gryffindor, and something beneath all of them, older than any of them, that he didn't have words for yet, that he thought was probably the sovereignty itself. The land. Britain, the magical part of it, which had been waiting for its steward the way a garden waits for rain. He pressed his fingertips flat on the table and felt it hum back at him through the wood and the stone and the deep cold earth below. Lord of 41 houses, something whispered in the language of old things. True King of Britain. Harry finished his sandwich. Folded the paper bag neatly. Left a tip. He had a letter to deliver and a very old man to meet. Chapter 2, The House That Breathes. The address wasn't in any directory. Harry had checked. The bookshop had a copy of magical addresses of notable British families, a fat green volume that smelled of pipe smoke and had entries for nearly every significant house in the country. House Black had an entry. It listed an estate in Scotland, a summer property in France, and a townhouse in. The ink here had been deliberately, professionally obscured, scratched through with something that had left the page slightly scorched. Someone had removed the London address from the official record. Harry had expected this and was not particularly bothered by it. The Gringotts letter had the address on its inner seal, readable only by the intended recipient or his designated heir. Harry counted, having accepted the Black family's allied house status through 2 separate inheritance chains. He pressed his thumb to the wax and felt the address settle into his mind like something that had always been there, number 12, Grimmauld Place. The letter also contained a note from Knockturn, dry and efficient. The wards will recognize your bloodline. Do not announce yourself. Walk up to the door and knock 3 times, then wait. If the wards reject you, step back. They will not reject you. It was the last line that Harry appreciated most. Not they probably won't or they shouldn't. Knockturn had done his analysis and he had committed to it. Getting to Grimmauld Place from Diagon Alley required navigating through 3 transitional zones, the kind of semi-magical London geography that existed in the gaps between the ordinary world and the hidden one. Harry had bought a proper wizarding map, and he moved through the evening city with his trunk shrunk into pocket size and his 3 books under his arm, reading street names and cross-referencing, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent years solving problems with limited resources. The Dursleys had never taken him anywhere. But they'd also never successfully stopped him from going places himself, and somewhere in that gap, Harry had become very good at navigating on his own. Grimmauld Place was a residential square, Georgian building standing in a curve around a central garden that was locked and slightly overgrown. The streetlights here were older than elsewhere, actual gas, Harry realized, still burning, and the entire square had a quality of temporal displacement, as if it existed slightly to the left of the present moment. Ordinary Londoners, a couple walking a dog, a man on a bicycle, moved past the square without looking at it. The dog looked, briefly, and then looked away with the uncertain expression of an animal whose senses have given it information it doesn't want to process. Harry stood at the edge of the square and looked at the gap between numbers 11 and 13. He walked into it. Number 12 assembled itself around the space as he stepped forward, the kind of architectural unfolding that he would never quite get used to, not invisible, exactly, but uninvited, the building existing perfectly normally as long as you weren't the sort of person it chose to exist for. The front was tall and dark, black-painted door, iron knocker in the shape of a serpent devouring its own tail. Window boxes that had once held plants, now empty. Steps worn smooth in the center by generations of feet. Harry knocked 3 times. The silence that followed was not empty. It was listening. Then the words hit him, and the experience was nothing like the pain in Knockturn Alley. This was more like being scanned, something ancient and intelligent moving over him, testing the texture of his blood and finding, in it, everything it was looking for. It found Peveril and Gryffindor and, threading through both, something that was specifically and recognizably black, 2 of the 41 houses remembering each other across centuries. The door opened. No one was on the other side. The door had opened itself, and the hallway beyond was dark and smelled of old wood, candle wax, and something faintly medicinal. Harry stepped in, and the door closed behind him with a sound like a word in a language he almost understood. The wards were never going to reject you. The voice came from the top of the staircase. Harry looked up. Arcturus Black was very old and very upright, which was a combination Harry found impressive. He was tall even in age, white-haired, dressed in a black robe that was somewhere between formal and extremely casual, the kind of clothes worn by someone who has been rich long enough to stop proving it. His face was angular, high-cheekboned, with eyes that were a clear, cold gray and currently fixed on Harry with an expression of such concentrated attention that it was almost physical. He was holding a glass of something amber, and his hand, Harry noticed, was absolutely steady. "They haven't rejected a Potter in 300 years, Arcturus said. And they've never rejected the convergence heir. I wrote the last subclause of the ward structure myself." He began to descend the stairs, unhurried, each step deliberate. "I was beginning to think I'd run out of time." "You nearly did," Harry said. "I'm 9. I'm aware." Arcturus reached the bottom of the stairs and looked at Harry across the hallway, a look that was thorough and unsentimental, taking in the ill-fitting clothes and the round glasses and the scar, and not lingering on any of it. "You're taller than I expected. People keep looking surprised by me," Harry said. "I'm starting to find it useful." Something shifted at the corners of Arcturus's eyes. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "Come in," he said. "I've had tea waiting for 3 days." On the assumption that whatever Gringotts found would eventually find its way here. The sitting room was a revelation in controlled elegance. Dark walls hung with portraits, family portraits, blacks going back centuries, and Harry was aware of them watching him with varying degrees of interest. A fire burned in a grate large enough to stand in. 2 chairs were positioned in front of it, angled toward each other, and between them a low table held a full tea service that was, in defiance of common sense, still hot. House magic, Harry thought. The house itself keeping the tea warm on the off chance its master had a visitor. He settled into the chair Arcturus gestured to and accepted a cup, and Arcturus sat across from him, and for a moment they both simply looked at each other across the firelight with the particular mutual assessment of people who understand they are about to form an important alliance and are each making sure the other is worth it. "The Gringotts letter told me your name," Arcturus said. "It told me you'd accepted the inheritance." "All 41. All 41. Arcturus was quiet for a moment. "How did you take that news?" "I asked questions," Harry said. Nagnok answered them. "I accepted the right and started planning." He paused. "How did you expect me to take it?" "I expected either shock or arrogance. One or the other, most commonly." Arcturus sipped his tea. "The shock tends to paralyze. The arrogance tends to cause problems." He looked at Harry over the rim of his cup. "You seem to have produced neither." "I was surprised," Harry said honestly. "But being surprised and being unable to act are different things. And as for arrogance," he considered it. "I know what the inheritance is. I know what it means. I also know I'm 9 and I've never been formally educated and I have a very large gap between what I am and what I can currently do. That seems like the wrong time for arrogance." Arcturus set his cup down. "The bloodline," he said. "You can feel it. All of them." "Yes. Since the acceptance rite. Like, fires in rooms." "Good. That's the correct perception. The old man's eyes were intent. Some of the inheritance is passive, the vaults, the properties, the political seats. But some of it is active. House magic is living magic. It responds to the air. It grows with use. He paused. You'll need to be taught. I know. That's partly why I'm here. Harry looked around the room, at the watching portraits, the fire, the house breathing quietly around them. But there's something else I need first. Arcturus waited. Sirius Black, Harry said. The old man's expression didn't fracture, it didn't do anything, which was itself a kind of answer, a controlled, careful nothing that spoke volumes about how much he was holding in check. He set his tea down precisely on its saucer. He looked at the fire. You found the notation in the Gringotts file, he said. No trial. Azkaban for, Harry did the math. It's been 8 years. He was imprisoned in 1981. He's been there 8 years with no trial, no formal charges heard before the Wizengamot, on the authority of an emergency provision that was signed by Dumbledore and Crouch without a medical evaluation and without legal process. Arcturus's jaw was tight. I know. Did you fight it? I tried. Something moved in the old man's voice, deep and brief. In the early years, I made inquiries. I was told the evidence was overwhelming. I was told, he stopped. Started again. Sirius was estranged from the family. He was a blood traitor by their reckoning, sorted into Gryffindor, friends with your father, everything the main line of the family considered a betrayal. When he was arrested, most of the blacks were either relieved or indifferent. His voice was carefully level. I was not. But you stopped fighting. I was old. I had no legal standing, the emergency provision had been made ironclad. Dumbledore is extraordinarily good at making things ironclad. Arcturus looked at Harry with the eyes of a man who has lived with a particular failure for a very long time. And I thought, if the convergence heir arrived, they would have the standing I didn't. I have the standing, Harry said. The fire crackled. A portrait shifted somewhere above them. The house breathed. Yes, Arcturus said quietly. You do. I'm going to get him out. I'm going to go to the ministry and demand the trial that was never held, and I'm going to use the 41 house seats and the royal designation to make them comply. Harry said it with the flat certainty of someone who has already worked out the steps. But I want to know about him first. Who is he, really? What actually happened in 1981? Arcturus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his robe and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, aged and creased, and held it out across the low table. Harry took it and unfolded it. It was a letter, written in an uneven hand that suggested it had been composed quickly, or under stress, or both. Arcturus, it read. By the time you get this I'll probably be in custody or dead. Peter is the traitor. I don't have proof yet but I know it. James trusted him and now James is dead. Lily too. I'm going after him. If I don't come back, look after Harry. He has no one else. Dumbledore's already moved him somewhere and won't tell me where. I'm afraid of what he's arranged. Please. You're the only one I trust to actually look. It was signed simply, Sirius. Harry read it twice. He folded it again along its original lines, carefully, and held it for a moment before setting it on the table between them. Peter, he said. Peter Pettigrew. Who was reported dead on the same day Sirius was arrested, Arcturus said. Killed by Sirius, according to the official account. Body never recovered, only a finger. His voice was very dry. A finger. Which, in retrospect, is an extraordinarily convenient amount of evidence. Do you believe the letter? I believe Sirius wrote it. I believe it was true when he wrote it. Arcturus paused. I have no idea what happened to Pettigrew. But I know Sirius well enough to know that he did not betray your parents. Whatever else he is, stubborn, reckless, occasionally catastrophically impulsive, he is not that. Harry absorbed this. He thought about a man in Azkaban for 8 years, surrounded by dementors, holding the knowledge of his own innocence with no means to prove it. He thought about what that did to a person. Then he stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it too hard led somewhere unproductive, and he had things to do. "I'll need documentation," he said. "Everything you have. The letter, any other communications, any evidence you've gathered. And I'll need someone who knows the Wisengamot procedure well enough to brief me before I walk in there." "I know the procedure," Arcturus said. "I have held a seat for 50 years. "Good. Then I want you to walk me through it tonight." Harry glanced at the window, where the London dark pressed against the glass, and then back at the old man. "I'm not going to the ministry tomorrow. I want to go in 3 days, when I have the full accounting from Gringotts and I understand exactly what I'm holding. But I want to be ready before the 3 days are up." Arcturus looked at him with those clear grey eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Where are you sleeping tonight?" "I hadn't decided. An inn in Diagon Alley, probably." "You'll stay here," Arcturus said, with a finality that wasn't harsh but was not negotiable. "This is a house with 17 bedrooms and 1 inhabitant. And you are, through 2 separate lines of inheritance, family." He stood, gathering his cup. "I'll have Creature prepare a room." "Who's Creature?" A sound from the doorway. Harry turned. The house elf was ancient, wrinkled past the point of any accurate age estimation, wearing a dirty pillowcase and glaring at Harry with reddened eyes that held a complex mixture of suspicion, resentment, and something else, something that shifted when the elf's gaze moved to Harry's forehead and then traveled to some interior assessment that Harry couldn't follow. "Creature sees the young master," the elf said, in a voice like crumpling parchment. "Creature sees many things in the young master." He paused. "The house sees them too." "Hello, Creature," Harry said. The elf blinked, apparently having prepared for something other than a direct greeting. "The young master speaks to Creature. You live here." It seemed rude not to. Harry paused. "The house, you said it sees things. What does it see?" Creature made a sound that was somewhere between a hiss and a sigh and somewhere else entirely. "Old blood," he said. "Blood that the house remembers. Blood that the walls have been waiting for." He straightened slightly, and the glare dialed back from hostile to simply assessing. "Creature will prepare the room." "The good room." "On the 2nd floor." He pointed a finger at Harry. "Not because Creature is ordered to. Because the house asks." He vanished with a crack. Arcturus was watching Harry with an expression that now more clearly resembled the real version of the almost smile from earlier. "He hasn't offered the good room to anyone in 30 years, he said." "I didn't do anything." "You said hello to him." Arcturus moved toward the door. "You'd be surprised how much that matters." The room was exactly what the house thought Harry deserved, which turned out to be considerably more than Harry thought he deserved. High ceiling, 4-poster bed with hangings in deep blue, a writing desk that was clearly older than most governments, shelves already stocked with books that, when Harry looked at their spines, turned out to be exactly the subjects he needed: bloodline law, house magic practice, Wisengamot history, the original royal charter and its subsequent modifications. He stood in the room with his small trunk and his 3 books from Diagon Alley and looked at the shelves for a long moment. The house had known he was coming. Or it had known someone like him was coming, and had made its preparations accordingly, and now it was offering them to him with the generosity of something that has been patient for a very long time. He sat at the writing desk and opened Bloodline Law and the old charter to the section on sovereignty activation, and he read until the candles burned low, and then he read some more. The next morning, Arcturus was already at breakfast when Harry came down, and the table had been set for 2 without anyone asking. Creature moved around the edges of the dining room in the slightly theatrical way of house elves who want to appear to not be watching while absolutely watching. "Sleep?" Arcturus asked. 5 hours. Enough. Harry sat down and reached for the teapot. The charter, there's a provision I want to ask you about. Section 14, subsection 3. The emergency convening clause. Arcturus looked at him over his newspaper. You read the charter last night. Most of it. What does the emergency convening clause actually require? The language says the convergence heir can call a Wisengamot session without ministerial approval, but the procedure for doing so isn't clear. Arcturus set the newspaper down. No one has used it in 4 centuries. But the procedure is, formal written notice delivered to the chief warlock, countersigned by holders of at least 3 ancient and noble house seats, filed with Gringotts as the neutral party. He paused. You hold 14 ancient and noble house seats yourself. So I can countersign my own notice. Technically, yes. Can Dumbledore refuse it? As chief warlock, he processes the convening notice. He cannot refuse it once it's properly filed. The charter supersedes the current Wisengamot charter on this specific point. Arcturus's eyes were sharp. He can, however, delay. Add procedural obstacles. Use the process against you. Then I file in a way that doesn't give him room to delay. Harry had been thinking about this since 4 a.m. I file the notice at Gringotts first, with the full documentation of my inheritance as supporting material. Once Gringotts certifies it, the ministry's copy is a notification, not a request. They have 72 hours to convene or they're in breach of the charter. Arcturus was quiet. Outside, the London morning made its ordinary sounds. You've worked this out already, he said. Most of it. You'll catch what I've missed. That's why I wanted to go through it with you. Harry buttered a piece of toast. The convening notice, I can file it at the same time as the serious trial demand. They're separate issues but they happen at the same venue. Is there any procedural conflict in filing both simultaneously? None that the charter recognizes. Then that's what we do on day 3. Harry looked at him steadily. I want Sirius out. And I want the Wisengamot to understand what it's dealing with before the session. Not after. Why before? Because surprises in politics cause panic, and panic makes people stupid and dangerous. If they know what I am before I walk in, they've had time to adjust. The ones who are going to be reasonable will have thought it through. The ones who aren't will have shown their hand. Harry paused. Also, it gives Dumbledore time to make a decision. What decision? Whether he's going to work with me or against me. Harry looked at the window. I think he's clever enough to know that working against me is a losing position. But I want to give him the space to arrive at that conclusion rather than have it forced on him. Forced conclusions breed resentment. Arcturus stared at him. What? Harry said. You're 9 years old. I keep being told that as if it's relevant to the argument I'm making. The old man made a sound, short, sharp, genuine, the first real laugh Harry had heard from him. Fair point, he said. And then, after a moment, more quietly, your father used to do this. Not the strategy, James was instinct, all instinct, brilliant and entirely too impulsive. But the way of arguing. The way of looking at a problem from 4 sides simultaneously. Something soft moved through Arcturus's expression, brief and carefully handled. He would have been very proud of you. Harry held that for a moment, turned it over, and put it somewhere safe. Tell me about him, he said. While we eat. Tell me what he was actually like. Arcturus picked up his teacup, and settled back in his chair, and for the next hour, over breakfast in a house that had been waiting in the dark for a long time, he told Harry about James Potter, and about Lily, and about the 4 ridiculous young men who had called themselves marauders and thought they were cleverer than the whole world, which they were, mostly, and about what had been lost on a Halloween night 8 years ago, and what had survived. The 2 days that followed had a quality that Harry would later think of as the sharpening of a blade. Not exciting in themselves, intensive, methodical, quietly exhausting, but producing something that got more dangerous by the hour. Arcturus was a brilliant teacher, in the particular way of people who have stopped trying to impress anyone. He knew the Waisengemot's history, its internal politics, which family held which loyalties and why, where the soft points were and where the load-bearing walls stood. He taught Harry procedure not as a series of rules to memorize but as a landscape to navigate, knowing which rules were ancient and therefore ironclad, which had been added recently and could be challenged, which existed purely on custom and would fold the moment someone applied real pressure. Harry absorbed it the way he absorbed everything, completely, with questions. He read between sessions. He lay in the big blue room at night running scenarios. What if the minister objected here? What if the chief warlock attempted to redirect there? What if the family heads in the chamber looked at him and simply refused to recognize his authority, and worked out responses, and then worked out the responses to those responses? On the afternoon of the second day, Nagnak's report arrived. It came by a Gringotts courier in formal livery, 4 days early, with a note that said, "I told you 4 days for thorough." I reconsidered. You need this. N. The report was 43 pages long and thoroughly transformed Harry's understanding of his own position. The properties alone, 16 in Britain, 5 in Europe, a research estate in Egypt that had apparently been continuously occupied for the past 2 centuries by a rotating staff of scholars who didn't know their patron had died and left no heir. The vaults contained not just gold but artifacts, documents, sealed letters from people long dead, political instruments of considerable weight. He found, in the vault record for House Slytherin, a sealed document marked for the Convergence heir only, by the authority of Salazar Slytherin, founder. He stared at that entry for a long time. "You'll need to retrieve it in person," Arcturus said, reading over his shoulder. "The Slytherin vault requires Parseltongue confirmation for sealed documents." Harry turned and looked at him. "Can I speak Parseltongue?" Arcturus raised an eyebrow. "Can you?" Harry thought about it. He thought about the snake at the zoo, and the odd sensation of easy communication, the way the words had arrived in his mouth already formed and natural. "Yes," he said. "I think I can." "Then you can access it when you're ready." "Not today. Today we finished the Waisengemot brief." Arcturus tapped the relevant section of the report. "The Fudge question, look at this. Cornelius Fudge holds no ancient house seat. His political power is purely ministerial. Which means under the old charter, he has no legal standing in a charter convening," Harry finished. "He can be present as an observer. He can speak only if the chief warlock grants it." He looked at the page. "That's going to drive him absolutely insane." "Yes," Arcturus said, and this time the smile reached his eyes completely. "It is." On the evening of the second day, Harry went to the drawing room and looked at the family tapestry. It covered most of one wall, a vast embroidered tree, hundreds of years of black stitched in gold thread, names and dates and connecting lines. He found Sirius near the bottom edge, and his name had not been burned off, which Harry had half expected. It was there, slightly discolored around the edges as if someone had tried to burn it and something had stopped them. The tapestry itself, perhaps, refusing. He found Regulus Black, Sirius's brother, listed below him, with a death date, 1979, and a note beside the name that was too small to read. He leaned in. The note read, in tiny embroidered letters, "He tried." He didn't know what that meant yet. He set it aside to find out later. He found his own mother's name, listed as a connecting line through the Evans bloodline. Lily Evans had carried one of the subsidiary inheritance lines, a thread from a branch of House Ravenclaw that had gone into the Muggle world 3 generations back. There she was, stitched in gold, with a date of birth and a date of death and M. James Potter and then Harry's name, at the very bottom of the tapestry, with no death date. His name had been there all along. He put his fingers on it. The thread was warm. The house made a sound, very low, that he felt more than heard. 41 fires burning in 41 rooms, and something older than all of them, and him, standing in the dark in front of a wall of names, preparing to walk into a room full of people with power and tell them plainly that the world had changed. He was not afraid. He went to bed, slept 7 hours, and woke up ready. Chapter 3, The Ministry Learns to Listen. The morning of the third day, Harry ate breakfast, read the final pages of the Wisengamot history Arcturus had assigned him, and then went upstairs and changed into the clothes he'd bought in Diagon Alley, dark trousers, a charcoal grey jacket, proper shoes. He stood in front of the mirror in the blue room and looked at himself. A small boy with round glasses and a scar and tidy dark hair looked back. Good, Harry thought. Let them see a small boy with round glasses. Let them underestimate the glasses. He came downstairs to find Arcturus already in his coat, and Creature standing by the door holding Harry's bag with the expression of a general preparing troops for a significant campaign. You should eat more, Creature said, by way of farewell. I'll eat when we get back, Harry said. With Sirius, hopefully. Creature made a complicated sound. His feelings about Sirius were, Harry had gathered over 2 days of observation, extremely layered, old resentment threaded through something that was probably love, the way family feelings often were. He didn't push it. There would be time. Arcturus looked at Harry with those clear grey eyes. Ready? Yes. They won't make it easy. I'm not asking them to make it easy, Harry said. I'm asking them to make it legal. Those are different things and only one of them is negotiable. Arcturus made a quiet sound and opened the front door, and the grey morning London light came in, and they walked out into it together. The Ministry of Magic entrance on a weekday morning had the specific energy of a large institution that considered itself very important and had the bureaucratic infrastructure to prove it. The telephone box on the street corner received them with its usual grinding descent, and the atrium unfolded around them, gleaming floors, gold-engraved walls, the fountain of magical brethren at the center spraying water cheerfully upward while the figures around it maintained their attitudes of harmonious cooperation that had always seemed, to anyone paying attention, quite aggressively aspirational. The ministry workers moving through the atrium were doing exactly what workers in important institutions do on ordinary mornings, moving purposefully between places, carrying scrolls, talking to each other, not looking at anything that wasn't immediately relevant to them. No one looked at Harry. Then he stepped up to the security desk. The wizard at the desk was heavy-set and bored, with the glazed expression of someone 3 cups of tea into a Wednesday. He looked at Harry over the desk with the mild irritation of someone whose morning was being interrupted by something small. Name and purpose of visit, he said. Harry James Potter, Harry said. Lord of Houses Potter, Black, Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, Gaunt, and 33 additional ancient and noble houses. I am here to file a formal demand for trial in the matter of Sirius Orion Black, prisoner number, he checked the number Nagnok had included in the report, 7312, currently held in Azkaban without trial since November 1981. I am also filing a formal charter convening notice for the full Wisengamot, under provision of the Royal Charter of Magical Britain, Section 14, Subsection 3. He placed 2 sealed documents on the desk. These are Gringotts-certified copies of both filings. The originals were lodged with Gringotts yesterday afternoon. The security wizard stared at him. Behind Harry, Arcturus said nothing, in the specific way that very composed people say nothing when they are quietly enjoying themselves. I'll need to, the security wizard started. You'll need to send those to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the Office of the Chief Warlock simultaneously, Harry said. Not sequentially, simultaneously, because the charter convening notice creates a 72-hour compliance window that begins from the moment of formal ministry receipt, which is now. He paused. I'll wait. The security wizard looked at the documents. He looked at Harry. He looked back at the documents, at the Gringotts seal in red wax, at the second seal beside it in gold, the convergence seal, ancient and unmistakable, which Nagnok had added with the quiet comment that anyone who knows what that seal means will understand immediately. He picked up his internal communication parchment and began writing very fast. They were shown to a waiting area on level 2, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement floor, that was clearly not designed for waiting in any comfortable sense. 3 chairs against a wall, a narrow window looking out at a stone corridor, a table with a 3-month-old copy of the Daily Prophet on it. Harry sat, crossed one leg over the other, and read the newspaper. Arcturus stood at the window with his hands behind his back, which Harry was beginning to understand was the old man's default position when something was amusing him. They waited 11 minutes. The door opened and Amelia Bones came through it. Harry had read about Amelia Bones in Arcturus's briefings, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, one of the few genuinely competent senior officials in the ministry, respected across political lines, impossible to bully, and possessed of a legal mind sharp enough to be genuinely dangerous. She was a solidly built woman in ministry robes, with square-framed glasses and a monocle tucked in her breast pocket, and she was carrying both Harry's documents and an expression that suggested she had already read them twice and was experiencing significant recalibration. She looked at Harry. She looked at Arcturus. Arcturus. Amelia, Arcturus said pleasantly. She looked back at Harry. You're Harry Potter. Yes. You're 9 years old. That keeps coming up, Harry said. It doesn't seem to affect the validity of the charter filings, does it? Amelia Bones sat down in the 3rd chair, placed the documents on the table, and looked at Harry with the expression of someone deciding how much of their professional skepticism to lead with. Then she apparently decided on none of it, because what she said was, "The Gringotts seal is genuine. I've verified it. The charter convening notice is legally sound, we had the legal department look at it in the last 10 minutes, and they confirmed the section reference and the procedure." She paused. The 72-hour clock is running. Fudge is aware. How aware? Harry asked. He's been in his office for 9 minutes shouting at people. She said it flatly. That's not a criticism, just a description of the current state of things. She looked at the second document. The trial demand is more complicated. No, it isn't, Harry said. It's very simple. Sirius Black was imprisoned without trial in 1981 on the authority of an emergency ministerial provision. That provision required a medical evaluation that was never performed, a Wiesengemot countersignature that was never obtained, and had a maximum legal duration of 6 months, after which either a formal trial had to be held or the prisoner released. Neither occurred. The emergency provision expired in May 1982 and was never renewed, which means Sirius Black has been held illegally for, Harry did the arithmetic, approximately 7.5 years. Amelia Bones was still. The legal argument is not difficult, Harry continued. What's difficult is that it's embarrassing for the people who let it happen. But embarrassment is not a legal obstacle. He looked at her steadily. I'd like to know if you're going to make this difficult, Madam Bones. Because I can conduct this with your department's cooperation or without it, but it will be considerably faster with it, and Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 8 years, so I would like to do this as fast as possible. Amelia Bones was quiet for a long moment. Then she uncapped a quill. Who has authority to access his records, she said. I do, as the filing heir. Also Lord Black, Arcturus inclined his head, as surviving senior family member. She wrote something. I'm going to recommend an emergency hearing date. Not full Wiesengemot, a judicial panel, which can convene faster and has full authority in matters of illegal imprisonment. She looked up. Can you be here tomorrow morning? Yes. The chief warlock will need to be notified. The charter convening notice already notifies him. Harry paused. I'd suggest letting him know about the trial hearing separately, as a professional courtesy. He'll appreciate not being surprised. Amelia looked at him again with that recalibrating expression. I'll send a memo, she said, and her tone had shifted, not warmer exactly, but more level, person to person rather than official to inconvenient child. Is there anything else you need from my department today? Yes, actually, Harry said. I'd like to submit a formal inquiry into the whereabouts of Peter Pettigrew. The quill stopped moving. Specifically, Harry said, "I'd like to know what independent verification was done on the evidence of his death in 1981, given that the body was never recovered and the only physical evidence was a single finger." Amelia Bones put the quill down. She sat back. She looked at the documents, then at Harry, then at Arcturus. "This is going to be a very long day," she said. "Probably," Harry agreed. "But I think it's a necessary one." Cornelius Fudge arrived 20 minutes later. He came into the waiting area with the energy of someone who had been building up to an entrance and had assembled a specific face for it, firm, authoritative, fatherly, the face of a minister who was in control of the situation and was graciously descended to address it personally. He had 2 aides with him and he was smoothing his lime green bowler hat as he came through the door. He was a round-faced man, slightly florid, with the reflexive charm of someone who had spent decades making people feel managed. He looked at Arcturus with the slight wariness of old political acquaintance, and then he looked at Harry, and the fatherly authority wavered slightly into something more complicated. "Harry Potter," he said. "My boy." He extended a hand. Harry shook it. "Minister Fudge. Now, I've heard there's been some filings this morning. Legal matters." Fudge settled into his authority like a man putting on a coat he'd worn too long. "These things can get complicated, especially when young people are involved. There are proper channels, you understand, proper procedures, and I think the channels have been used," Harry said pleasantly. "The Gringotts filings were made yesterday afternoon. The ministry copies were delivered this morning through the official security desk, which constitutes formal ministry receipt. The 72-hour Weisengamot convening window is open, the trial demand has been received by the DMLE, and Madam Bones has agreed to schedule a judicial panel hearing for tomorrow morning." He looked at Fudge with an expression of polite attentiveness. "Is there something specific you wanted to address?" Fudge blinked. The fatherly coat was too big suddenly. Well, the Weisengamot convening. That's quite an extreme, Section 14, subsection 3 of the Royal Charter of Magical Britain. The provision is clear. Harry tilted his head. "Do you have a legal challenge to the procedure, Minister? Because if you do, the appropriate venue is the Weisengamot's own legal chamber, not a waiting room on level 2. One of Fudge's aides was writing something very fast. The other was staring at the floor. Fudge looked at Arcturus. "Arcturus, surely, the Lord Potter's filings are in order," Arcturus said, mildly. "I've reviewed them personally. I'd advise the ministry to comply within the Charter's timeframe. It would be, I think, the appropriate response." "The boy is 9 years old," Fudge said, and now the charm had dropped far enough that the fear underneath was visible, not fear of Harry specifically, Harry thought, but fear of the shape of what Harry represented, the way a man fears not the wave but the collapse of the seawall he's been trusting. "The inheritance has no minimum age requirement," Harry said. "The Charter has no minimum age requirement. The legal authority attached to 41 House seats and the royal designation has no minimum age requirement." He paused. "Would you like me to cite the specific provisions?" "I have them memorized." Fudge stared at him. In the ministry corridor outside, the ordinary Wednesday morning was continuing, people walking past with scrolls and purposes, having no idea. "What is it you actually want?" Fudge said, and underneath the political management, this was the real question, the one the man had actually come here to ask. "Today. Sirius Black's release from illegal imprisonment." Harry was straightforward about it, no performance. "Tomorrow. The Weisengamot session. There are legislative matters I intend to address." He paused. "Minister, I don't want your job. I'm not here to dismantle the ministry, it does genuinely useful work and most of it should continue. I'm here because I have a legal obligation to the houses I've inherited and to this country's magical sovereignty, and I intend to fulfill it." Another pause, and this one was measured. "The question isn't whether these things are going to happen. The Charter makes them inevitable. The question is whether they happen in a spirit of cooperation or conflict. I prefer cooperation. He meant it. That was the thing about Harry's manner in these moments, it was never a performance of reasonableness, it was actual reasonableness, which was considerably more difficult to argue with. Fudge looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, the political calculation, the assessment of options, the slow, reluctant arrival at a conclusion. The hearing tomorrow, he said finally. I'd like to be present. As an observer, Harry said. You have no standing in a charter judicial proceeding. Madam Bones is the appropriate official. He let it sit for 1 second, then added, without sharpness, you're welcome to observe, of course. Fudge nodded, once, jerkily, and turned and left without another word. His aides followed him. Amelia Bones, who had been standing at the wall through this entire exchange, cleared her throat. I'll have the hearing confirmed by this afternoon, she said. Is 10 o'clock suitable? 10 o'clock is perfect, Harry said. Thank you, Madam Bones. She left. Harry and Arcturus were alone in the waiting area. Arcturus looked at Harry for a moment. Cooperation or conflict, he said. You gave him the out. I meant what I said. I don't need him as an enemy. He's more useful as someone who's cautiously decided I'm less dangerous than he feared. Harry stood, straightening his jacket. Besides, the people I actually need to worry about aren't in that room. Dumbledore. He hasn't come. He will, Arcturus said. He'll know about the filings before the day is out. He's had people watching Gringotts. He glanced sideways at Harry. Are you prepared for him? I've been thinking about how to handle him since Nagnock mentioned the 3-day window. Harry picked up his bag. He's not a villain. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He genuinely thinks he's doing good. He put me with the Dursleys because he thought it was necessary. He froze Sirius's accounts because he thought, or he convinced himself, that it was necessary. He paused at the door. People who genuinely believe they're doing good are harder to argue with than people who know they're doing wrong. Why? Because they have no guilt to leverage. You can't appeal to their conscience because they think their conscience is already satisfied. Harry pushed open the door. So you don't argue with the conscience. You argue with the outcome. Dumbledore arrived at 2:30. They were in the Level 2 conference room that Amelia Bones had given them to use while the hearing preparations were made, a small, functional room with a round table and enchanted windows showing a pleasant if entirely fictional countryside view. Harry was going through property documents. Arcturus was reading the Daily Prophet with the expression of someone who has long since stopped expecting it to say anything accurate. The knock was gentle. Come in, Harry said. Albus Dumbledore entered wearing robes of a deep, soft violet and an expression of gentle, luminous concern that Harry recognized, from 2 days of research, as the expression the old wizard deployed when he wished to seem non-threatening. He was very tall and very old, and his eyes above the half-moon glasses were blue and sharp and missing nothing. He looked at Arcturus. Arcturus. A slight inclination of the head. Albus. Equally slight. Then he looked at Harry, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the room held it, the weight of 8 years of decisions made in Harry's absence, converging on this small conference room on a Wednesday afternoon. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm and genuine and slightly sad in a way that was entirely real. I cannot tell you how glad I am to see you well. Hello, Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. Please sit down. Dumbledore sat. He looked at Harry with those sharp blue eyes and the warm expression around them, and Harry thought, he's already decided how this conversation goes. He's already decided I'm a child who needs to be gently redirected. He came here with a plan. I understand there have been filings, Dumbledore said. Legal matters. I want you to know, Harry, that whatever you've been told, whoever has been advising you, the situation is complex. There are things at stake that you may not fully, Sirius Black was imprisoned for 8 years without a trial, Harry said. The emergency provision that authorized his imprisonment expired in May 1982. He has been held illegally for 7.5 years. That's not complex. The complexity is in why it was allowed to continue. He looked at Dumbledore calmly. Why was it allowed to continue? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. A very specific kind of quiet, the kind where someone is deciding between two versions of the truth. In 1981, there were factors. Did you believe he was guilty? I believed, at the time, that the evidence was strongly indicative. Did you perform any investigation before freezing his accounts and blocking his guardianship rights? A pause. The situation was urgent. You needed protection. Did you investigate? Harry asked again. Dumbledore looked at him, and for a moment the gentle luminous expression thinned slightly, and what was underneath was not unkind but it was much more complicated. No, he said. I did not conduct an independent investigation. I acted on the information available to me. The information available to you was that Sirius Black was your former student's closest friend and had been named godfather to his child, and that he was claiming the real traitor was someone else. Harry paused. That information suggested an investigation, not a preemptive institutional shutdown. Dumbledore was very still. You are extraordinarily well informed for a 9-year-old. I read quickly, Harry said. And I've had good resources. He let that sit for a moment, then continued, because he meant what he'd said to Arcturus. This was not about punishing Dumbledore, it was about outcomes. I'm not here to assign blame. Blame is historical, and I'm more interested in the present. Sirius Black comes home tomorrow, after a fair hearing. That's happening regardless. He paused. What I want to know is whether you're going to support it or complicate it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time, and Harry looked back, and the room was very quiet. I owe Sirius Black an apology, Dumbledore said at last, and the words were quiet and undecorated, no performance in them. And you, Harry. The choices I made in 1981, I made them because I thought they were necessary. I still believe some of them were. But not all of them. And not the ones that hurt people who deserved better. All right, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. All right? You acknowledged it. I don't need more than that right now. Harry paused. What I do need is for you to not be in that hearing room tomorrow trying to manage the process. Madam Bones runs it, the judicial panel rules, and we all accept the outcome. I wasn't intending to interfere. Good. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with an expression that Harry found very interesting. It was the expression of a man encountering something he hadn't accounted for, not a threat, not an obstacle, but a genuinely different way of operating, and trying to calibrate his response to it. The Wisengamot session, he said. The charter convening. There are things I want to discuss with you before, we'll discuss them at the session, Harry said. You hold the Chief Warlock seat. I have no issue with that, you're well suited to it and I think you'll be fair in that role, if you choose to be. He paused, and this pause was deliberate. I think you're a genuinely good man who has made himself the center of a story that isn't only his. I'd like to offer you the chance to step back from the center without losing any of the good you've done. Dumbledore sat with that for a moment. You are very like your mother, he said, finally, quietly. She had the same quality of directness. Unadorned. It was her greatest gift and it was, occasionally, quite startling. I'll take that, Harry said. Tell me about her sometime. When we have more time. Something in Dumbledore's face softened, genuinely. He nodded. I would like that very much. He stood to leave. At the door, he stopped and turned back. Harry, the Wisengamot session. What you're planning, is legal, necessary, and long overdue, Harry said. But I'll conduct it properly. I'm not here to burn things down. Dumbledore looked at him, one more long, recalibrating look, and then he said, simply, no. I don't imagine you are. And left. Arcturus waited until the door had closed, then set down the Daily Prophet. That, he said, was masterfully done. He needed to feel heard, Harry said, pulling his property documents back toward him. People who believe they're doing good need to know the person they're talking to has actually considered their position. Otherwise they just dig in. He found the page he'd been on. He'll be fair tomorrow. I think he's genuinely relieved someone is handling this who isn't asking him to be the center of it. You're quite certain he'll be fair? Not completely. But I'm certain that if he isn't, it won't be because I gave him no choice. Harry looked up. What time does the confirmation from Amelia Bones usually arrive? It arrived at 4 o'clock. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, courtroom 3, level 10. Judicial panel of 3. Harry Potter and designated counsel invited to present the case. The prisoner to be brought under escort. Harry read the confirmation and felt something settle in him, not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of rightness, the specific feeling of a thing moving toward where it should be. He went to bed early and was awake before the alarm. Courtroom 3 had the architecture of consequence, tiered stone seating curving around a central chair that was, Harry was acutely aware, designed to be intimidating, chains and all. He arrived 10 minutes early and stood looking at the chair without the chains. Amelia Bones had quietly ordered them removed when she'd seen Harry's expression, and then turned to watch the room fill. The judicial panel arrived. Amelia Bones, a wizard Harry recognized as senior Wizengamot member Tiberius Ogden, and a witch he didn't know who was introduced as Griselda Marchbanks. Good, Harry thought, all three had reputations for being unbuyable. Fudge arrived and took an observer seat without being invited to speak and without attempting to be. Small progress. Dumbledore arrived, glanced once at Harry, gave him the smallest nod, and sat in the gallery. Harry sat at the presenting table with Arcturus beside him. He had his documents organized, his arguments structured, and his thoughts very clear. At 10 past 10, they brought Sirius Black in. 8 years of Azkaban were written into every line of the man who entered, gaunt in a way that went past thin into something structural, dark hollows under eyes that were too bright, dark matted hair, hands that shook slightly until he made them stop. He wore prison robes that had long since ceased to be any specific color. He moved as someone who had spent years conserving energy, each step considered. But he walked upright. He did not shuffle, did not look at the floor. He came into courtroom 3 on his own 2 feet with his chin level, and when his eyes found Harry, he stopped walking for just a moment. Harry looked at him. 8 years of Azkaban and 12 years of grief for James and Lily and a Halloween night in 1981, and here was the man who should have been raising him, who had written a desperate letter to Arcturus Black about a traitor and then spent nearly a decade paying for telling the truth. Harry nodded at him, once, the same nod Dumbledore had given him, small, certain. I see you. I know. We've got you. Sirius Black sat in the central chair with his back straight. The hearing took 1 hour and 40 minutes. Harry presented the legal argument, the expired provision, the illegal duration of imprisonment, the absence of trial, the procedural violations at every stage. He did it without drama, without performance, laying each point before the panel with the precision of someone who has read every relevant statute and is not guessing about any of it. Amelia Bones asked questions. He answered them. Tiberius Ogden asked about the Pettigrew evidence. Harry presented his argument, the finger, the uncorroborated account, the complete absence of independent verification, and noted that a formal investigation into Pettigrew's actual whereabouts had been requested from the DMLE. When the panel asked Sirius directly, his account of events, what had happened in 1981, Sirius spoke clearly. His voice had a roughness from disuse and something else, but the words were clear and his memory was complete. He had always maintained his innocence. He had never been given the opportunity to state it in this room before today. 47 minutes, Griselda Marchbanks said, when the panel returned. She looked at Harry. That was how long it took us to deliberate. Because the case was, as you correctly identified, not complex. She turned to face the central chair. Sirius Orion Black. This panel finds that your imprisonment was conducted in violation of the Wisengamot's own procedural requirements, that the emergency provision authorizing your detention expired unlawfully without renewal or trial, and that you have suffered wrongful imprisonment at the hands of the Ministry of Magic. She looked at the room. You are released. Immediately and unconditionally. All charges are formally expunged. A pause. The Ministry will be in contact regarding compensation proceedings. The room was quiet. Sirius sat in the chair in the center of the room and looked at his hands. Harry walked up to him. Crouched down so they were eye level. Looked at him. Hey, he said. Sirius looked at him. You're James's boy, he said, rough-voiced. You look like him. I know. How? Sirius stopped. Steadied himself. How did you? Long story. I'll tell you all of it. Harry paused. Can you walk? Yes. Sirius stood, slowly, with the care of someone relearning that they were allowed to move freely. He stood at his full height and looked at the courtroom around him, at Arcturus, who was standing very still by the table with an expression of controlled relief, at Dumbledore, who had his eyes closed for a moment in the gallery, at Fudge, who was staring at the floor. Then he looked back at Harry, and something that had been locked away in him for 8 years, you could almost see it, cracked open slightly, not all at once, but in the careful, tentative way of things that have been in the dark and are approaching the light. Where are we going? Sirius asked. Home, Harry said. Grimmauld Place. Arcturus has tea and Creature has opinions. Sirius made a sound that was, very nearly, a laugh. Creature always has opinions. He saved you the good room, Harry said. Come on. He walked out of courtroom 3 first, and Sirius followed, and then Arcturus, and the door swung shut behind them on the empty room, and the chair in the center sat vacant as it should have been years ago. In the gallery above, Dumbledore opened his eyes. He looked at the closed door for a long moment. Then he looked at his hands, at the power they'd held for so long and the choices they'd made with it, and he thought about directness and outcomes and the extraordinary specific quality of someone who refuses to make themselves the villain in your story even when they have every right to. He stood, straightened his violet robes, and walked out the other door. Outside in the corridor, Harry was telling Sirius something that made the man's mouth curve slowly upward, the first real shape of a smile, unfamiliar in the muscles that made it, and Arcturus was pretending to read a ministry notice board, and the corridor was lit with its ordinary ministry lights, and the world had just gotten slightly more like what it should be. Chapter 4, The Weight of 41 names. Sirius Black ate like a man who had forgotten food could taste like something. Creature had made soup, a proper one, thick with vegetables and something slow-cooked and savory, and bread that was still warm from the oven. He had set it on the kitchen table without being asked and then stood in the doorway with his arms folded and his expression carefully neutral, which Harry had learned was Creature's version of emotional vulnerability. Sirius ate 2 bowls before he said anything. Harry and Arcturus sat across from him and let him eat, because some things needed to happen in their own time, and a man who had survived 8 years of Azkaban dementors deserved to eat soup without anyone demanding a conversation from him. When Sirius set down the spoon he looked at his hands for a moment. They had steadied since the courtroom. Not completely, but noticeably. Right, he said. Tell me everything. So Harry did. He went through it methodically, Knockturn Alley, Nagnock, the inheritance right, the 41 houses, the 2 days at Grimmauld Place with Arcturus, the ministry filings, the hearing. He told it plainly, the way he told everything, without decoration, and Sirius listened without interrupting, his grey eyes moving between Harry's face and the table, processing. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a long moment. 41 houses, he said. Yes. Including Slytherin. Yes. And Gryffindor. Yes. And the, what did you call it? The royal designation. True heir of magical Britain's sovereignty. It's in the Gringotts file under that exact heading. Sirius looked at Arcturus. Is he always like this? I've only known him 3 days, Arcturus said, but yes, apparently. Sirius looked back at Harry, and the almost smile from the courtroom corridor was more present now, clearer, beginning to find its shape. James would have been completely insufferable about this, he said. In the best possible way. He'd have had business cards made. I thought about it, Harry said. Seemed excessive. Sirius laughed, a proper one this time, short and slightly rough from disuse, but real. Creature, in the doorway, made a sound that was technically a dismissive huff and was actually something warmer. The laugh faded, but the warmth of it stayed in the room. Sirius looked at Harry with an expression that was older than amusement, something that had to do with grief and time and unexpected gifts. Thank you, he said. For, I know what it took to do that. The filings, the ministry, all of it. He paused. No one else was going to. I know, Harry said. That's why I did it. How did you know I was innocent? Your letter to Arcturus. Nagnak's records. And, Harry paused, because this part was harder to explain in clean language, I know what loyalty feels like, in the house magic. I can feel what you were to my father. It doesn't feel like betrayal. He looked at Sirius steadily. And a guilty man doesn't write that letter. Sirius absorbed this. The house magic. It's complicated. I'll explain as I understand it better. Harry paused. One question. Go on. Peter Pettigrew. Where do you think he is? The warmth in the room shifted. Something cold moved through Sirius's expression, not anger, not quite, but the specific quality of a man who has had 8 years to think very hard about one person and has reached conclusions he cannot yet prove. Alive, he said. I'm certain of it. He was a rat animagus. He looked at Harry. Do you know what that means? Unregistered transformation. He can survive in rat form for extended periods. Indefinitely, if he wants. He's been hiding. Somewhere safe, somewhere surrounded by people who wouldn't know what he was. Sirius's jaw tightened. When we find him, Harry said. It goes through proper channels. Evidence, testimony, trial. He paused. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in the truth on the record, officially, where it can't be erased. Sirius looked at him for a moment. James's instincts, he said quietly, and Lily's principles. Is that a good combination? It's a terrifying combination. But he said it like it was the best news he'd heard in years. The next morning brought 3 things simultaneously, the full Gringotts report sitting on the breakfast table when Harry came down, a formal owl from the Weisengamott's administrative office confirming the session date, 2 days hence, 9 o'clock, and Andromeda Tonk standing on the front steps of Grimmauld Place looking like she had decided to arrive and was prepared to argue with the house about it if necessary. Harry had opened the door before she knocked. She was tall, with dark hair shot through with a few threads of grey, and Sirius's cheekbones, and the bearing of someone who had been cast out of a prominent family and had built something better with the pieces. She had a folder under one arm and the expression of a woman who had read the morning's Daily Prophet and had opinions. She looked at Harry. You're him, she said. Harry Potter. You're Andromeda Tonks. Nymphadora is going to be extraordinarily annoyed she missed this, Andromeda said, stepping inside with the ease of someone who had grown up in this house and was choosing not to make the return into a moment. She's at Auror training or she'd be here. She moved through the hall and into the kitchen without being shown the way, set her folder on the table, and said, to Sirius, who was on his 3rd cup of tea, you look terrible. Good morning to you too, Andy. You're alive, which is better than the alternative, so I'll save the emotion for later. She sat down, opened her folder, and looked at Harry, who had followed her in and was looking at her with the specific attention he gave to people he was in the process of assessing. I'm a lawyer, she said. I have been for 11 years. I specialize in estate law, Inheritance Disputes, and Wiesengemot Procedure. She pushed the folder toward him. I spent last night pulling everything I know about the charter convening precedents. You'll need legal counsel for the session. You're offering, Harry said. I'm here at 8:30 in the morning with a folder, she said. Yes, I'm offering. Harry looked at the folder. It was, he could see from the top page, considerably more detailed than anything he'd compiled himself on the session procedure. He looked up at Andromeda. Why? She seemed to appreciate the directness of the question. Because what you're doing matters. Because my family's legacy in this country is an embarrassment and I'd like to be part of making something better from it. She paused. And because Sirius just spent 8 years in Azkaban while I was out here with all my legal qualifications and I didn't get him out, and I will spend the rest of my career making up for that if it's what's required. Harry turned to Arcturus. Do you have any objections to her joining us? Arcturus, who Harry suspected had known Andromeda was coming before she'd arrived, given the third cup of tea that had been on the table before she sat down, said, none whatsoever. Good. Harry pulled the folder toward him and opened it. Walk me through what you have. We have 2 days. The Gringotts report demanded attention and got it. Harry read it that evening after dinner, the 4 of them at the table now, a unit forming from pieces that had been separately incomplete, and there was something about the specific quality of that table, that kitchen, that felt like a foundation being laid, and what the report showed him changed the shape of what he'd been planning. The 41 houses had active holdings, active obligations, active enemies. Some houses had outstanding blood feuds, old debts and old wrongs that the law of Wizarding Britain required the head of house to either resolve or formally surrender. Harry had inherited those feuds without inheriting the context for them, and Arcturus spent 2 hours walking him through each one, which were worth escalating, which had already resolved through time and death, which were dangerous. House Gaunt presented the most significant complication. The Gaunt line had fractured into madness, the last surviving member, Tom Riddle, currently operating under the name Lord Voldemort, currently fragmented between states of existence after the events of 1981, was technically a blood heir of House Gaunt, which Harry also now held. The conflict of inheritance was legally unprecedented and practically consequential. He has a claim, Harry said. Or rather, the Gaunt inheritance has 2 claimants. Contested inheritance, Andromeda confirmed. Under Goblin Treaty law, in a case of conflict between 2 claimants, the active heir takes precedence over an inactive one. Riddle has not made formal claim on the Gaunt estate through any legitimate legal process. You have accepted the full inheritance. She paused. The Gaunt seat, the vault, the properties, they're yours under current law. That won't stop him from being furious about it when he returns to full power, Sirius said. No, Harry agreed. It won't. But it means that when he does, he's doing so as someone who has already lost the legal argument, which changes the terms of the conflict. He looked at the Gaunt entry in the report. The Slytherin vault, the sealed document. We need to retrieve that before the session. Andromeda looked at him. You speak Parseltongue. Apparently. A pause around the table. Then Sirius said, James used to do a thing with spells where he'd get one of them almost right and they'd do completely unexpected things. This is somehow more unsettling than that. It's from the Slytherin inheritance line, Harry said. Not from Voldemort. I want that to be clear, it's a founder's gift, not a dark mark. The distinction matters, Andromeda said, with the tone of a lawyer who is already thinking about how to frame this publicly. And it can be demonstrated. Slytherin's original manuscripts make clear that Parseltongue was a natural inheritance gift of the bloodline, not an inherently dark trait. The conflation with dark magic is cultural, not factual. Then we get ahead of the cultural assumption, Harry said. Before the session. How? We tell Nagnok, Harry said. He releases the inheritance confirmation documentation through official Gringotts channels before the Wiesengemot session. Every member of the Wiesengemot receives the full inheritance profile before they walk into that chamber. No surprises. Andromeda looked at the table for a moment, thinking. That's a significant preemptive move. It removes the option of manufactured shock, Harry said. You can't stand up in the Wisingamot and claim I'm something dangerous and unexpected if every member has had 2 days to read the documentation and form their own judgment. He paused. Some of them will be frightened. Some will be hostile. But they'll all be informed, and informed people make better decisions than surprised ones. Arcturus looked at Andromeda. He's been doing this since he arrived, he said. I can see that, Andromeda said. She was looking at Harry with an expression that was trying to be professionally neutral and wasn't entirely succeeding. All right. I'll draft the cover letter for the Gringotts distribution. You write the inheritance summary in your own words, it should be your voice, not a goblin bank's language. Tonight? If we want it distributed tomorrow, yes. Harry nodded and pulled a piece of parchment toward him. The Slytherin vault required a separate Gringotts visit the following morning, which Harry made with Knockturn personally escorting. The vault was on a level Harry hadn't been to, below level 7, where the temperature dropped further and the torches burned blue instead of gold and the doors were older than anything else Harry had seen, rough stone carved with serpents that moved, not with the quick decorative motion of enchanted illustrations but with the slow, muscular movement of actual serpents. Harry stood before the sealed document alcove inside the vault and looked at the wax seal, which was black and bore the Slytherin crest. He could feel it waiting, not passively, but actively, like a held breath. He said, in the language that had always lived somewhere in his throat, open for your heir. The words came out in fluid sibilance, natural as any language he'd ever spoken, and the seal broke with a sound like a single note struck on a very old instrument, resonating down the vault, and the document unfolded itself. It was written in 2 languages, Old English and Parseltongue simultaneously, the same words running in parallel down the page, which was extraordinary craftsmanship. Salazar Slytherin had written the same text in 2 languages within the same physical document and they occupied the same space. Knockturn, who was waiting at the vault entrance and had the expression of someone trying very hard not to appear fascinated, said nothing. Harry read it standing there in the blue torchlight of the oldest vault he'd ever entered. The document was a letter. And it began, to the heir who finally arrives, you took longer than I expected, but I suppose 4 centuries is within the margin of error for plans of this scope. Harry nearly laughed. You carry all 4 of us, Slytherin had written. Godric would say something insufferable about destiny. Helga would want to make sure you've eaten. Rowena would hand you a reading list. I will simply tell you what you need to know. What followed was 15 pages of specific, practical information, the charter, the sovereignty, the 41 convergence points that the 4 founders had deliberately engineered, and at the end, a passage that Harry read twice and then stood very still for a moment afterward. There is a magic older than houses and older than inheritance and older than any of the names we have given it. The land knows it. You carry it. When you stand in the chamber of your country's governance and the old magic moves through you, do not moderate it for the comfort of the room. They will want you to be small. You were not made to be small. Be the thing you are, completely, and the land itself will speak through you, and even the frightened and the hostile will recognize what they are hearing. The crown is real. You know where it is. You've always known. Harry folded the letter carefully, placed it inside his jacket, and walked back out of the vault. Well? Knockturn said. Slytherin had very good handwriting, Harry said. And considerably better humor than his reputation suggests. Knockturn made a sound that might, in different circumstances, have been a chuckle. That afternoon the houses started arriving. Not physically, the heads of house sent owls, some of them clearly the result of receiving the Gringotts inheritance distribution that morning, some of them clearly the result of word traveling through the network of old families that travels faster than owls could account for. Harry received 14 letters before 5 o'clock. Andromeda sorted them on the kitchen table with the efficiency of someone who has processed legal correspondence for years. Immediate recognition, she said, making a pile on the left. 5 families. Longbottom, Abbott, Bones, that's Augusta and Amelia both, separately, Davis, and Greengrass. She moved to the center pile. Cautious recognition, awaiting session. 7 families. She looked at the right pile. Hostile, non-recognition, or demanding legal challenge. How many in that pile? Harry asked. 2. She turned them over. Malfoy and Not. Harry looked at the names. What are their specific objections? Malfoy disputes the validity of the charter convening mechanism on procedural grounds he doesn't specify. Not disputes the House Slytherin inheritance claim. She paused. Both letters are extremely well written. They have good lawyers. Good lawyers with bad arguments, or good lawyers with real arguments. Andromeda considered this. Malfoy's procedural objection is technically arguable, but it's going to lose in front of any panel that isn't politically compromised. Not's Slytherin dispute has no legal basis whatsoever. Riddle made no formal claim and Not has no standing to make it on his behalf. She set both letters down. They're not trying to win legal arguments. They're trying to force delays and create the impression of disputed legitimacy before the session. Can they? Not in the session itself. The charter procedure is clear and Gringotts certification is not challengeable in the Wizengamot. She paused. But they can make noise. They can influence other families who are in the cautious pile. She looked at Harry. Lucius Malfoy in particular has significant social leverage over several of the families sitting on the fence. What does Lucius Malfoy actually want? Harry asked. Not his legal position. His actual motivation. Sirius answered before Andromeda could. He had been sitting at the end of the table with a cup of tea, following the conversation with the quiet, intent manner he had when processing information. He was doing that more now, Harry had noticed. The 8 years of Azkaban had stripped away some of his natural impulsiveness and left something more careful underneath, not damaged, just recalibrated. Lucius Malfoy wants the world to stay the way it is, Sirius said. He's built his entire identity on the current structure. The pureblood social hierarchy, the ministry's dependence on families like his for financial support, the Wizengamot operating as a gentleman's club for old money. He looked at Harry. You walking into that chamber with 41 seats and a royal bloodline threatens every single source of his power simultaneously. So he's afraid, Harry said. Deeply. Then I need to talk to him before the session. Harry picked up the Malfoy letter. Not to reassure him. But to make clear exactly what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. Frightened people make chaos. I can't afford chaos in the chamber. He looked at the letter. Is there a way to request a meeting that he can't decline without appearing weak? Arcturus, who had been listening from the armchair by the window, said, Send the meeting request on your Lord's seal with a formal house-to-house notation. Under the old house protocols, refusing a direct formal meeting request from a senior house is a significant social slight. He'll come. Then I'll send it tonight. Harry set the letter down. The other 7 cautious houses, I want to write to each of them personally. Different letters, not a circular. Each house has specific concerns and I want to address those specifically. He looked at Andromeda. Can you brief me on each family's main interests? What they care about, what they're afraid of, what they stand to gain. She looked at him for a moment with the expression he was becoming familiar with, the one that kept revising its expectations upward. Yes, she said. I'll need an hour. I'll need 2 hours to write the letters after that. We start after dinner. Sirius was looking at Harry with an expression that he seemed to become aware of halfway through it and then decided not to hide. It was the expression of a man seeing James Potter and Lily Evans simultaneously in a child who had made himself out of them and added something entirely his own. You know, he said, when Amelia Bones comes through for us tomorrow and I'm technically a free man, you are technically a free man, Harry said. The panel ruled yesterday. When I am practically a free man with access to my own resources and my own choices, Sirius paused. I want to officially offer myself as your godfather. Properly. In whatever way you want or need. He paused again, and under the dry delivery was something that had been waiting a very long time, something careful and unsteady and sincere. I know I wasn't there. I know what that cost you. And I can't fix that. But I can be here now. The kitchen was quiet. Creature, in the doorway, had the expression of someone who has pretended for decades to feel nothing and is having a great deal of difficulty maintaining it. Harry looked at Sirius for a moment. I'd like that, he said. Very much. He paused. Though I'll warn you, I'm not easy to parent. I noticed, Sirius said. James was also not easy to parent, and that never stopped anyone from trying. Did anyone succeed? Your grandmother made a reasonable attempt. Sirius's mouth curved. Effie Potter was genuinely formidable. You'd have liked her. His expression shifted briefly, the grief there and then managed. She'd have been over the bloody moon about all this. Tell me about her, Harry said, and the kitchen settled into the warmth of an evening that felt, in the way very few evenings do, like something being repaired. Lucius Malfoy arrived the next morning at 10 o'clock exactly, because whatever else he was, Lucius Malfoy was punctual. He was everything his letter had suggested, tall, blonde, impeccably presented, with the bearing of someone who has always inhabited the top of a hierarchy and has never questioned whether the hierarchy was the right shape. He came into the Grimmauld Place sitting room with his cane and his silver blonde hair and his careful eyes, and he looked at Harry with a gaze that was trying to be contemptuous and was landing somewhere more complex. Harry didn't stand to greet him. He was sitting in the armchair by the fire with the Slytherin letter and the Gringotts report, and he looked up from them when Malfoy entered and said, Lord Malfoy. Thank you for coming. Malfoy sat. He looked around the room, at Arcturus, who gave him a cool nod, at Andromeda, whom he clearly had not expected and was carefully not reacting to, at the absence of Sirius, who Harry had asked to stay out of the room for this conversation because Sirius and Malfoy's history was a liability in a meeting that needed to be productive. Lord Potter, Malfoy said, and the title was precisely delivered, neutral, neither warm nor hostile, which told Harry that Malfoy had already made his initial calculation and had decided that open hostility was too expensive. Your letter raised procedural objections to the charter convening, Harry said. I'd like to hear them properly. Not the written version, the real version. Malfoy's eyes were steady and intelligent. The charter convening mechanism hasn't been used in 4 centuries. The Wizengamot has developed its own procedures in that time. There's a reasonable argument that custom supersedes a dormant charter provision. The charter was never repealed, Harry said. Dormancy isn't dissolution. The Ministry's own legal department confirmed this yesterday when they verified my filing. The Ministry's legal department confirmed the filing, Malfoy said. They didn't rule on the supersession question. Because the supersession question has no standing. The charter exists in Goblin law as well as Wizarding law. The two are jointly binding under the 1752 Interspecies Accord. You need to challenge both simultaneously, and the Goblin courts don't recognize precedent by custom, only precedent by explicit amendment. Harry paused. Was that your legal team's argument? Because if so, you should ask for your money back. Something moved in Malfoy's eyes, involuntary, quick, the flash of recognition of a more capable opponent than anticipated. He recalibrated smoothly. The Slytherin inheritance dispute has no standing, Harry said. Tom Riddle has made no formal claim. You have no standing to make it on his behalf, and doing so would constitute tacit acknowledgement that you maintain contact with someone the Ministry has classified as a dark criminal. He paused. I don't imagine that's what you were going for. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. I'm going to be direct with you, Harry said. Because I think you're intelligent enough to appreciate it and it will save us both time. I know what you're afraid of. You're afraid I'm going to walk into the Wizengamot and restructure the entire system in ways that leave you with less power than you currently have. He looked at Malfoy steadily. You're right that the system is going to change. The blood status legislation is going to be reformed. The Waisengemot's voting structure is going to be adjusted. Some of the informal power that certain old families have accumulated beyond their legitimate house authority is going to be addressed. Malfoy's expression was very controlled. But here's what I'm not doing, Harry continued. I'm not abolishing the old houses. I'm not stripping legitimate house seats. I'm not dismantling the aristocratic structure of Wizarding Britain. I hold 41 seats in that structure. I am deeply invested in it continuing to function. He paused. House Malfoy has genuine authority, genuine history, and genuine contributions to Wizarding Britain. None of that is going away. What's going away is the use of that history as a weapon against people who don't share your bloodline. The fire crackled. The room was very still. What exactly, Malfoy said, slowly, are you proposing to legislate? I'll present it in the session, Harry said. But I'm telling you the framework now, privately, so you can make an informed decision before you walk in tomorrow. He looked at Malfoy. I'm offering the old families the chance to be part of the new structure instead of fighting it. Those who work with it will retain their legitimate authority. Those who fight it will lose credibility in front of the chamber and the public simultaneously, because the Gringotts documentation and the charter provision are ironclad and everyone is going to know it. Lucius Malfoy sat with this. He sat with it for a long time. My son, he said, finally, starts Hogwarts in 2 years. Harry waited. I would like his future to be stable, Malfoy said, and under the careful aristocratic delivery was something genuine, not warmth, not yet, but the real thing that drove the politics, the thing underneath the ideology, the thing all fathers had regardless of what else they were. Whatever the structure is. It will be stable, Harry said. More stable than the current one, actually. The current structure has a fracture point that's been growing for 50 years. I'm proposing to fix it before it breaks catastrophically. He paused. That's better for your son than the alternative. Malfoy looked at him for one more long moment. Then he inclined his head, small, precise, the gesture of a man making a political decision that he was not entirely comfortable with but recognized as correct. I will not oppose the convening, he said. Thank you, Harry said. That's all I needed. When Malfoy had gone, Andromeda let out a slow breath. How did you know the sun was the leverage? Because the letter was about protecting something, not attacking something, Harry said. Hostile letters that are really about protection always have the real motivation in what they don't say. He picked up his quill. I need to finish the letters to the cautious houses before tonight. Sirius appeared in the doorway, having apparently been listening from the corridor. Lucius Malfoy, he said. You talked Lucius Malfoy into a voluntary concession in about 20 minutes. He talked himself into it, Harry said. I just gave him the correct information. Sirius stared at him. Lily, he said, to no one in particular. Pure Lily. I'll take that, Harry said, and went back to his letters, and outside the window the last afternoon before the Waisengemot session moved toward evening, and in the deep earth beneath London, 41 sets of house magic burned steadily in their rooms, and the thing beneath all of them, the oldest thing, waited with the patience of land. Chapter 5, What the Land Remembers. The dream came before the alarm. Harry was standing in a field he didn't recognize, or rather, he recognized it the way you recognize music you've never consciously heard but somehow know all the notes to. Rolling hills, pre-dawn grey, the kind of English countryside that exists in the oldest part of the country's memory. The grass was wet. The air smelled of chalk and deep water and something metallic that wasn't unpleasant, the way old coins smell. In the center of the field was a stone. Not dramatic, no sword, no altar, no theatrical lighting. Just a standing stone, rough-edged, maybe chest height, with markings on it that weren't quite runes and weren't quite something else. It looked like it had been there since before anyone thought of putting names on things. Harry walked toward it. The ground under his feet felt different with every step, more present, more aware, as though the soil itself was registering each footfall and filing it somewhere important. He reached the stone and put his hand on it. The field exhaled. Every blade of grass, every stone beneath the soil, every root and river and chalk ridge from here to the coast, all of it breathed outward at once, a single enormous breath, and the sound it made was not a sound at all but a recognition, the land knowing the specific quality of the blood in his palm and saying, in the only language land has ever spoken, "There you are." Finally. He woke up with his hand flat on the mattress and the feeling of wet grass still on his palm. He lay there for a moment in the blue room at Grimald Place, looking at the ceiling, and then he got up, because the Wisengamot session was in 4 hours and the dream had told him something Slytherin's letter had only gestured at. He knew where the crown was. He was dressed and at the kitchen table with the Gringotts report open before anyone else stirred. Kreacher appeared, made tea without being asked, and stood in the doorway watching Harry with an expression that had been shifting, over the past several days, from assessing to something proprietary, the specific look of a creature that has decided someone belongs to its household and has opinions about their welfare accordingly. The young master did not sleep enough, Kreacher said. I slept 5 hours, Harry said. Where is the oldest vault? Not by vault number, by age. Which is the oldest property in the estate holdings? Kreacher was very still for a moment. Kreacher knows this. I thought you might. The elf moved to the table with a slowness that was deliberate, not infirm, and sat in the chair across from Harry in the way a creature sits when it is about to say something it has been holding for a very long time. There is a place, Kreacher said. Not in the Gringotts report. It is not a Gringotts holding. He paused. It is older than Gringotts. Harry looked at him. Where? The hollow, Kreacher said. In the valley beneath Godric's hollow. Not the village, under it. There has always been a hollow beneath the hollow. He looked at Harry's hands. The young master's blood will open it. No other will. Have you been there? Once. The elf's red eyes were distant. The old master, he meant Arcturus, Harry had gathered, took Kreacher once, long ago, to confirm it was still sealed. It was. He paused. Kreacher has never gone back. The place does not want visitors. Only, he searched for the word, only the belonging one. The heir. The heir, Kreacher confirmed. He looked at Harry steadily. Today is the day, Kreacher thinks. Harry looked at the time. 6 o'clock. The session was at 9. How long does it take to get there? For the young master. Minutes. The place will come when called. Harry sat with that for a moment, the casual, immense strangeness of it, the way the magical world kept revealing layers he didn't have frameworks for yet, and he kept finding that his instinct was not bewilderment but recognition, as if each new impossible thing was simply a name being put to something he'd always known was there. Wake Arcturus, he said. Tell him I'm going before the session and I need him to know where I am. Kreacher will tell him. The elf stood. He paused. The young master should eat first. Make me something I can eat quickly, Harry said. And then I'll go. Godric's Hollow at 6:30 in the morning was cool and still and smelled of late summer, the village proper was silent, the cottages dark, the memorial in the square unchanged, the bronze figures of his parents holding a bronze baby that was somehow and always him. Harry stood at the memorial for exactly 30 seconds, looked at his parents' frozen faces with the specific quality of attention he gave to everything that mattered, and then turned away from the square and walked south. The pull was unmistakable now that he was here, he felt it in the soles of his feet, a directional pressure, gentle and absolutely certain, drawing him toward the edge of the village and down a slope he didn't consciously know but his feet found without hesitation. The grass was long here, the kind of field that hasn't been farmed in generations, and the morning light was coming in sideways and gold across it, and somewhere beneath it all the chalk and the deep water and the old metallic smell from the dream. He walked for 10 minutes. The village disappeared behind the hill. He was in a shallow valley he was certain didn't appear on any ordnance survey map, surrounded by hills and the sound of a stream he couldn't see, and in the center of the valley there was a stone. Not the dramatic standing stone from the dream, smaller, rounder, half sunk into the earth, almost entirely covered in moss, looking for all the world like a perfectly ordinary old rock that sheep might lean against. Except there were no sheep. And the grass around it grew differently, brighter, in a perfect circle. Harry crouched beside the stone. Put his palm flat on the moss. The valley moved. Not the field breathing of the dream, this was more specific, more structured, the feeling of a mechanism of immense age and precision engaging, each part moving into place with the weight of centuries behind it. The ground beneath the stone didn't open so much as rearrange itself, the way a combination lock rearranges its discs, patient, sequential, inevitable. Steps appeared. Rough stone, going down, torch brackets on the walls with torches that lit as he descended without being asked, warm gold light that smelled of beeswax and something older. He went down 20 steps and emerged into a chamber. It was not large. It was not decorated. It was a single room of rough-hewn stone with a low curved ceiling and a floor that was one continuous piece of the chalk bedrock, and in the center, on a plinth that was simply a raised section of the same floor, sat a box. Not a chest. Not an ornate vault. A box of dark wood, about the size of a hat box, with no lock, no inscription, no ceremony about it whatsoever. The simplicity of it was, Harry thought, entirely intentional. The four founders had been making a point. He stood in front of it for a moment. The 41 fires in their rooms were all burning simultaneously, intensely, more present than they'd been since the acceptance rite. The sovereignty magic, the oldest one, the one without a name, was moving through him with a steadiness that felt like a tide coming in, unhurried and unstoppable. He opened the box. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, was a circlet. Not a crown in the theatrical sense, no jewels, no elaborate metalwork, no points. A circlet of silver dark metal he didn't have a name for, plainly made, smooth, perhaps an inch wide, with a single mark on the inner surface. He turned it in the torchlight and looked at the mark. It was the same mark that appeared at the center of the convergence seal on all 41 inheritance documents, the point where all the bloodlines met, a simple intersection of 4 lines. Gryffindor. Slytherin. Ravenclaw. Hufflepuff. Plus 37 more, spiraling outward. Plus the sovereignty itself, the land's own signature, and that was the mark. He looked at it for a long moment. Not reverence, consideration. This was a tool, and like every tool he'd held in the past week, it was only useful if deployed correctly. He placed it on the plinth beside the open box, stepped back, and said, aloud, in the empty chamber, I need to understand what accepting this actually means. The inheritance was one thing, that was houses and vaults and seats. This is different. What does this do? The chamber was quiet. Then it answered, not in words, not in the bone vibration language of the first day in Knockturn Alley, but in the specific way a room answers when it has been waiting to be asked the right question. Information arrived in him like water into a dry riverbed, following channels that had been prepared and waiting. The circlet was not a symbol of power. It was a key to a specific function of the sovereignty magic, the ability to call the land's testimony. In the oldest courts, before the ministry, before the Wisengamot, before any formal magical governance, disputes were resolved not by argument alone but by the land's own confirmation of truth. The sovereign could call it. The land would respond. It could not be faked, manipulated, or denied. That function, dormant for 4 centuries, was what the circlet activated. Harry thought about the Wisengamot session. He thought about what he was going to walk into, 41 seats against a room full of people, some hostile, some frightened, some genuinely uncertain, all of them about to be asked to accept a fundamental restructuring of the world they'd built their identities around. He thought about what the hardest moments would be, not the legal arguments, those he had culled, but the moments when someone stood up and said, "Who are you to tell us this?" And the answer needed to be not just a legal citation but something that resonated below the level of argument. He picked up the circlet and put it in his jacket's inside pocket, next to the Slytherin letter. Right, he said, to the chamber, to the land, to the 41 fires and the sovereignty and all of it. Let's go. He walked back up the steps. The chamber sealed itself behind him. The stone settled back into its moss with the air of something very old returning to patient waiting. He had an hour and 20 minutes before the session. He could do it now, had been able to sense the acceptance rite, the house magic providing something that normally required years of training, and he suspected this would require careful management when Hogwarts eventually had opinions about it, and landed on the front steps of Grimmauld Place and went inside to get ready. Arcturus was in the hall when he came through the door, dressed in full formal robes, silver-headed cane, every line of him composed for a significant occasion. He looked at Harry and said nothing for a moment. Then, you went. I went. Did you find it? Harry touched his jacket. It's simpler than I expected. That seems right. Arcturus looked at him for a long moment with those clear grey eyes and then nodded, once, with the specific quality of a man whose long patience has been rewarded and who is choosing not to make a ceremony of it. The others are ready, he said. Sirius is wearing his best robes, which are 16 years old and slightly too large, but he looks well enough. Andromeda is reviewing her notes. He paused. There is a significant crowd outside the Wizengamot entrance. The news has traveled. How significant? The Daily Prophet ran the story this morning. The inheritance documentation, the charter convening, the trial result. Arcturus paused. Sirius's release was covered extensively. The word being used is unprecedented. What's the tone of it? Mixed, Arcturus said, with the honesty Harry had come to rely on him for. Most people don't know what to make of it. Some are excited. Some are frightened. The editorial board seems to have had an argument about how to characterize you, because the piece reads as if 3 different people wrote alternate paragraphs. That's fine, Harry said. Mixed is better than decided. Decided minds are harder to reach. He went upstairs, changed into the formal clothes Andromeda had quietly arranged 2 days ago, dark, good quality, nothing performative about them, and stood at the mirror for 30 seconds. Different from the morning 3 days ago when he'd looked at a small boy in round glasses and decided the underestimation was useful. Today he looked the same but carried differently, and he considered whether to put on the circlet now or wait and decided on wait. The chamber was the correct place for it. Putting it on in a bedroom mirror was the wrong note entirely. He put his glasses back on, straightened his jacket, and went downstairs. The Wizengamot chamber on level 10 was, Harry noted as he walked in, exactly as old as it felt. The tiered seating rose in a horseshoe around the central floor, every seat assigned by house and designated by a small placard, and the seats were filling with witches and wizards in plum-colored robes wearing their house crests, some of whom Harry recognized from his research and some of whom he identified in real time by their expressions, the cautious ones, the hostile ones, the ones who had received his personal letters and were watching him with the focused attention of people who had already decided to keep an open mind. He walked in with Arcturus on his left and Andromeda on his right and Sirius 2 steps behind, and the room did what rooms do when something significant enters them. It got quieter, not silent, but quieter, the way a theater quiets when the stage lights change. Harry walked to the floor and stood in the center of it, and looked at the horseshoe of seats around him, and waited. Dumbledore presided from the Chief Warlock's chair at the head of the horseshoe, magnificent in silver robes, his half-moon glasses catching the chamber light. He looked at Harry with the expression of a man who had spent 3 days processing a great deal of information and had arrived at something that resembled genuine equilibrium. He brought his gavel down once, lightly. This session of the Wizengamot is called to order under the Emergency Charter Provision, Section 14, Subsection 3, as filed and certified by Gringotts Bank. His voice was even and clear and carried no editorial weight. The convener is Lord Harry James Potter, holder of 41 House seats as certified by Gringotts Inheritance Protocol. Lord Potter, you have the floor. Harry looked at the room. He didn't have notes in his hands, didn't have documents, didn't have anything but the specific quality of attention he brought to everything. He let the room settle for 3 full seconds, and then he began. "I want to start with what I'm not here to do," he said. "I'm not here to tell you that everything you've built is wrong. I'm not here to dismantle the Waisengamat or abolish the ministry or tear down the old houses. The institutions of magical Britain have genuine value and I hold 41 seats in them and I intend to use those seats constructively for the rest of my life." He paused. "What I am here to do is address 3 specific failures that have weakened this country's magical structure for decades. 3 things that, left unaddressed, will eventually break us." He had their attention. Even the hostile ones, not, in the far right of the horseshoe, and the 2 unnamed members who'd sent no letters at all and were currently radiating calculation, were listening. The first failure is legal. Sirius Black spent 8 years in Azkaban without a trial. You've seen the documentation. The panel has ruled. But it would be a mistake to treat that case as an isolated incident rather than a symptom. He looked at the room. The emergency provisions that allowed his illegal imprisonment without review are still on the books. They've been used 4 times in the past 30 years, I have the Gringotts records to confirm this, and in 2 of those 4 cases, the procedural requirements were similarly unmet. This chamber's legal authority is only as strong as its adherence to its own procedures. I'm proposing immediate reform of the emergency imprisonment provisions. No one interrupted. Good. The second failure is structural. The blood status legislation currently encoded in 7 separate ministry statutes, passed between 1920 and 1943, creates a hierarchy of wizarding citizenship that has no basis in magical ability, no basis in the charter, and no basis in the founding documents of this institution. He let that land for a moment. I want to be clear about what I'm proposing. I am not proposing that all magical ability is identical. It isn't, and the sorting of houses and the recognition of expertise and achievement remain valid. What I'm proposing is that citizenship, rights, and legal standing in Wizarding Britain cannot be contingent on who your grandparents were. These statutes will be repealed. The room shifted. Not exploded, shifted, a wave of response moving through the seats, reactions visible in faces and posture and the particular tension of people who feel the foundations of their assumptions being pressed. Not stood. Point of order. Dumbledore looked at him. The convener holds the floor. You'll have opportunity to respond. Not sat. His jaw was tight. The third failure, Harry said, is historical. And this one is harder. He paused, gathering the right words. Magical Britain has been waiting for something for 4 centuries. The sovereignty hasn't been acknowledged, the charter hasn't been honored, and the result is a governance structure that operates without its own constitutional foundation. Laws have been made in a legal vacuum. The ministry exercises authority it was never formally granted. He looked at the room. I'm not here to seize power. I'm here to put the foundation back under a house that has been standing on air. He paused. The charter convening is the first step. The second step is the formal ratification of the sovereignty provision, which requires a 2/3 majority vote of this chamber. The room was not quiet. It was doing the specific thing rooms full of powerful people do when confronted with something that reorders the game, everyone talking to their neighbor in low urgent voices, faces arranged across a spectrum from fascinated to alarmed, Fudge in his observer seat with the expression of a man watching a large tree fall in the direction of his house and calculating escape vectors. Dumbledore brought his gavel down. The chamber will come to order. He looked at Harry with those sharp blue eyes and said, Lord Potter, you mentioned the sovereignty provision requires ratification. Can you speak to what the governance structure would look like under that provision? Specifically, the relationship between the sovereign authority and the existing ministry structure. It was a good question. Harry had expected it from Dumbledore specifically because it was the question a man who had held enormous institutional power would ask, not what authority do you claim but what does the structure look like, the question of a builder rather than a defender. The sovereign authority is constitutional, not executive, Harry said. It sets the boundaries within which the ministry operates. It cannot be used to govern day-to-day, that's the ministry's function, and it continues. He paused. Think of it as the difference between a constitution and a government. The constitution limits and defines. The government acts within those limits. Currently, magical Britain has a government but no constitution. I'm proposing to give it one. Silence. Real silence this time. Then Augusta Longbottom, from the noble House Longbottom seat, said in her magnificent carrying voice, and the 41 House seats. How do they function in the new structure? Exactly as they function now, Harry said. Each house retains its vote. The representation structure doesn't change. What changes is that there's now a body of constitutional law that the Wisingamots legislation must comply with, in the same way that Muggle democratic governments have constitutions their parliaments must respect. He looked at her directly. The old houses don't lose power under this structure. They gain protection. Their rights and their seats become constitutionally guaranteed rather than depending on ministerial goodwill. Augusta Longbottom sat back in her seat with the expression of someone who has just been shown a mathematical proof that changes the answer to a problem they'd been approaching from the wrong angle. Nott stood again. The convener is 9 years old, he said, and his tone was controlled, precise, a man making a legal point rather than a personal attack. Under what provision does a 9-year-old child hold sovereign constitutional authority over the magical governance of Britain? Harry looked at him. Under the same provision that allows a 9-year-old to hold 41 House seats, convene an emergency charter session, and legally extract an improperly imprisoned man from Azkaban, he said. The inheritance has no minimum age requirement. The charter has no minimum age requirement. If the chamber has a concern about the governance structure during my minority, the charter provides for a council of regents, which I would propose to establish and which would include several members of this chamber. He paused. Lord Nott, I want to ask you a genuine question. What specifically worries you about the proposals I've made today? Not procedurally, substantively. What outcome are you afraid of? Nott was not expecting this. The directness of it caught him, and for a moment the legal precision dropped and something more honest appeared. I'm afraid, he said, slowly, of what happens to the old structure. To the families who have maintained the magical traditions of this country for centuries. The old structure is protected under constitutional guarantees that it currently doesn't have, Harry said. The traditions you're describing, the house magics, the old practices, the knowledge that belongs to the ancient families, those are currently only protected by custom, which is not protection at all. I'm offering them legal permanence. He paused. We want the same thing, Lord Nott. We want the old magic to survive. We disagree about who threatens it. Nott sat down. Lucius Malfoy had not spoken. He sat in the Malfoy seat with his hands folded and his expression composed and his eyes moving between Harry and the room with the calculation of a man who has already made his decision and is now watching others make theirs. At 10:30, Harry said, before the vote, I want to address something that isn't in my formal proposals. Something the chamber should know. Dumbledore, who had been conducting the session with scrupulous fairness, looked at him. The floor remains yours. Harry reached into his jacket and took out the circlet. He held it in one hand, simply, not dramatically, letting the chamber see it. The dark metal caught the light, plain and old and entirely specific. The room's energy changed again, several members leaning forward, one very old witch in the far left of the horseshoe making a sound that was barely audible but was recognizable as a sharp intake of breath. This was made by the 4 founders, Harry said. Sealed beneath Godric's Hollow. It activates the sovereignty magic's oldest function, the land's own testimony. He paused. I'm not using it today. I don't need to. The legal case for everything I've proposed is complete without it. He looked at the room. But I want you to know it exists. I want you to know that the thing I'm asking this chamber to ratify isn't a legal argument or a political maneuver. It's real. The land is paying attention. And it has been waiting a very long time. He put the circlet back in his pocket. The old witch in the far left, he found out later her name was Griselda Marchbanks, who had also been on his judicial panel, and who was 93 years old and had sat in this chamber for 60 of those years, said, very clearly, "I know what that circlet is. My grandmother described it to me when I was a girl. She said she'd seen it once, in a vision, and that when the heir came carrying it there would be no point in arguing with the shape of things." She looked at Harry. "I'm not arguing with the shape of things." And she sat back. Something moved through the chamber. Not agreement, not yet, but the specific shift of a room that has collectively moved from whether to how. The vote happened at 11:15. The three proposals were separated: emergency imprisonment reform, blood status legislation repeal, and sovereignty ratification. The first two passed with large majorities, 29 and 26 respectively out of 43 voting members present. Even not voted for the imprisonment reform. The sovereignty ratification required 2/3. 29 votes. The count was 31. Lucius Malfoy voted yes. Harry stood in the center of the chamber floor and heard the count and felt the world change, not with a bang, not with ceremony, but with the specific quiet of the world accommodating a new truth that had always been coming. In his pocket, the circlet grew warm. Not dramatically, the warmth of a hand that has been held for a long time. The land registering the ratification, marking it, updating its own ancient records. Dumbledore brought the gavel down for the final time. He looked at Harry from the Chief Warlock's chair with those sharp blue eyes, and in them was something that had not been there 3 days ago, not defeat, not resentment, but something closer to relief, the expression of a man who has been carrying an enormous weight and has just been offered help with it and has, finally, had the wisdom to accept. "The motion carries," Dumbledore said. "The sovereignty provision is ratified. This session is concluded." The chamber erupted, not chaos, but noise, voices from every direction, some outraged, most not, the sound of a large number of intelligent people processing a very large change and not being entirely sure how to feel about it. Harry stood in the center of it, calm, and let it move around him. Sirius appeared at his shoulder. 31, he said. "You needed 29. I know. You thought you might lose it. I thought it was possible, yes." Harry looked at the chamber. "I would have come back. A ratification attempt can be refiled after 30 days. I would have spent those 30 days talking to every member individually. But you didn't have to." "No." Sirius was quiet for a moment, watching the room settle around them. "James," he said quietly, more to himself than to Harry. James would have been absolutely unbearable about this. In the best way. He paused. He'd have bought everyone in the chamber a drink. "We can do that too," Harry said. "When Arcturus recovers from the excitement." Sirius glanced at the old man, who was standing at the side of the chamber being greeted by Augusta Longbottom with a warmth that suggested decades of mutual respect and a shared relief too large for ordinary words. "He's going to be fine," Sirius said, and his voice had something in it that Harry recognized, the specific quality of someone who has been allowed, after a very long time, to look at the people they love without the filter of loss. Andromeda appeared on Harry's left. "Not wants to speak to you," she said. "Privately. After the chamber clears. Tell him 20 minutes. The Marchbanks anteroom." She went. Harry stood in the chamber a moment longer, looking at the tiered seats, at the plaques with the house names, at the ancient architecture of a room that had been making decisions about the magical world for 3 centuries. He thought about the letter in his pocket, Slytherin's voice from 400 years ago saying they will want you to be small. He looked at the room and felt, not triumph, not the thing novels describe as triumph, which is always louder than the real version, but the specific satisfaction of a problem solved correctly. The kind of satisfaction that immediately turns to the next problem, because there were always more problems, and the land that had just recognized him had 400 years' worth of them accumulated and waiting. He thought, right. What's next? and reached into his pocket and touched the circlet once, and felt it warm against his fingertips like a promise kept. Chapter 6, The King's First Morning. Not wanted to talk about his son. Harry had expected something political, a conditional concession, a negotiated position, perhaps a careful inquiry about what protections the new constitutional structure would offer families like his. He had prepared for all of those. He had not prepared for a man sitting down across from him in the Marchbanks anteroom and saying, without preamble, "My son Theodore is 11 next year. He's brilliant. Genuinely brilliant, the kind of mind that should be doing significant things." He paused. His mother was a Muggle-born witch. Harry looked at him. She died when Theodore was 4, not continued. The cause of death was complicated. The circumstances were never formally investigated. He met Harry's eyes. "I voted yes on the blood status repeal today not because I've had a political conversion. I voted yes because my son is half-blood and the world he's inheriting should not penalize him for what his father's friends would call a taint." He paused. "And because the laws that killed his mother were the same laws I spent 20 years defending." The anteroom was small and quiet. Somewhere in the corridor outside, the sounds of the chamber clearing drifted through, voices, footsteps, the enormous institutional noise of a significant day settling into its aftermath. "I'm sorry about your wife," Harry said. Nott looked slightly startled, which told Harry that he had come into this room prepared for a political exchange and the directness of ordinary human response had caught him off guard. "Thank you," he said, after a moment, with a stiffness that was not coldness but inexperience with sincerity. "The investigation your wife deserved," Harry said. "I can't reopen something 10 years old without evidence to work from. But if you have evidence, anything you preserved, anything you remember, I'd like it formally filed with the DMLE under Amelia Bones, with my name attached to the inquiry request." He paused. "No guarantees about outcome. But it will be taken seriously." Nott was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man encountering a door he had not known existed. "Why would you do that?" he said. "I voted against you twice today before I voted for you once." "Because it's the right thing to do," Harry said. "And because the new structure I've just ratified is only worth the paper it's written on if it applies retroactively as well as going forward." He paused. "Bring the evidence to Amelia Bones. I'll make sure she knows to expect it." Nott stood. He smoothed his robes, which was the gesture of a man buying himself a moment to manage an expression he wasn't sure about. Then he looked at Harry with something that was not warmth, not yet, but was the specific look of someone revising a category they have put a person in. "My son," he said, "is going to hear about today for the rest of his life." "So will everyone's children," Harry said. "That's the point." Nott left. Harry sat in the anteroom for 30 seconds, alone, and let himself be tired. Just for 30 seconds, the specific tiredness of a day that had required every part of him operating simultaneously, the kind of tiredness that felt productive rather than depleting, the tiredness of someone who has run a long race and finished it, and knows there are more races, and is entirely fine with that. Then he stood and went back out into the corridor. The group that had walked into the ministry that morning reassembled in the atrium, Harry, Arcturus, Sirius, and Andromeda, and for a moment they simply stood there in the fountain spray-dampened air, the 4 of them, while the ministry continued its afternoon around them with the faintly surreal normalcy of institutions that process extraordinary events and then immediately return to filing things. Sirius looked at the fountain of magical brethren with the expression of someone seeing something familiar from an unfamiliar angle. "That fountain," he said. "It's been bothering me all morning. Something about it. The magical creatures are positioned below the wizards," Andromeda said. "Goblins, centaurs, house elves, all looking upward adoringly. It was commissioned in 1947 by Minister Leach, who was, by all accounts, a spectacular bigot." "We should replace it," Sirius said. "With what?" Arcturus asked. Sirius thought about it. "Something better. Ask Harry, he'll have an opinion." Everyone looked at Harry. The original Gringotts Charter signing, Harry said, without hesitation. The 1292 treaty between the Goblin Nation and the magical families of Britain, it was the first formal act of interspecies cooperation in the country's history. There's a record of what the signing looked like, carved on the ceiling of Nagnach's office. He paused. Equal parties at a table, signing together. That's what should be in the atrium. A silence. I'll commission it, Arcturus said, with the straightforward generosity of someone to whom a major art commission is an ordinary Tuesday decision. We should ask Nagnach to have input on the design, Harry said. His name on the commission, not just as a consulted party. Arcturus blinked. The goblins don't generally, they haven't generally been asked, Harry said. That's different from not wanting to. He turned toward the exit. I need to go back to Gringotts today. There's the Slytherin document to formally register, the Regency Council to establish, and I want to tell Nagnach what happened in the session before he reads it in the Prophet. He glanced at Sirius. Come with me. Obviously, Sirius said. Arcturus, the Regency Council. I want to talk about composition tonight. Would you be willing to chair it? Arcturus looked at him, and Harry could see him assessing the question from several angles, the responsibility of it, the age of him, the specific meaning of a man who had spent 40 years waiting for this moment being asked to steward it. His expression did something careful and private. Yes, he said. I would. Good. Harry looked at Andromeda. The constitutional draft, the formal document that codifies what was ratified today. That needs to be written properly. Legally sound, publicly comprehensible, built to last. I'll draft it, Andromeda said, and her voice carried the specific quality of someone who has found the exact work they were meant to be doing. Give me 2 weeks for a first version. Take 3 if you need them. Do it right. She nodded once, the nod of a professional accepting a significant brief, and then she did something Harry had not seen her do in the days he'd known her. She smiled, full and unguarded, the kind of smile that happens when a person's external life catches up with their internal sense of purpose. Right then, she said. I'll start tonight. Nagnach received them in his office with the equanimity of a creature who considers equanimity a professional obligation, though the amber eyes were sharp with something that went well past his usual alert interest. 31 votes, he said, when Harry had given him the full account. Yes. The blood status repeal. 26. Lucius Malfoy. Voted yes on the ratification. Harry paused. He surprised me. I'd estimated him as a possible abstention. He didn't surprise me, Nagnach said. I have been watching Lucius Malfoy's account activity for some years. He has been, diversifying. Gradually, quietly. Moving away from the pureblood financial network and into broader holdings. He met Harry's eyes. He has been preparing for a world that looks like the one you just made, I think, for longer than he would like to admit. How very Slytherin of him, Sirius said, from the chair in the corner where he'd settled with the ease of someone who had decided that Nagnach's office was an interesting place and he intended to be comfortable in it. The goblin had looked at him once upon arrival, assessed something, and apparently decided Sirius was acceptable. Positioning himself on both sides until the outcome becomes clear. It's functional politics, Harry said, without judgment. As long as he votes correctly going forward, I don't particularly care about his internal timeline. He turned back to Nagnach. The Regency Council. I need it established formally before the Prophet coverage generates a ministry response. What's the Goblin Treaty requirement for recognition? A formal composition document, sealed by both the sovereign authority and Gringotts as neutral party. A minimum of 3 members, maximum of 7. Nagnach produced a form from somewhere. He always produced forms from somewhere. The council holds no sovereign power, it acts as administrative regent for time-sensitive matters during your minority, with all significant decisions requiring your direct approval. So it's more of a standing advisory board with limited emergency authority. That is a more accurate description, yes. Nagnok looked at him over the form. The ministry will try to insert their own representative. They can propose one, Harry said. I'll accept Amelia Bones, if she's willing. She's been fair throughout and she has legal authority I can work with. He thought about it. Arcturus as chair. Amelia Bones if she agrees. Andromeda for legal and constitutional matters. That's 3. He paused. Nagnok, would you consider a position as the Goblin Nation's formal representative on the council? Not as a Gringotts employee, as a national representative. It would be the first such appointment in the history of the Wisengamot structure. The office was very quiet. Nagnok set down his quill. He looked at Harry with those amber eyes for a moment that stretched into something significant. You're proposing formal goblin representation in the governance of magical Britain. Yes. For the first time in 400 years. For the first time ever, technically, since the pre-ministry structure also didn't include it. Harry paused. The sovereignty is about magical Britain, all of it, not just the wizard portion. That's what the charter actually says when you read it properly. The Goblin Nation is the oldest continuous magical civilization on these islands. He looked at Nagnok steadily. You should have had a seat at the table from the beginning. I'm offering it now because it's the right thing and because frankly the council will make better decisions with you in the room. The silence stretched for 3 more seconds. I will need to consult the Gringotts director, Nagnok said. Of course. It may take several days. Take the time you need. The formal establishment of the council can wait for a proper composition. Harry paused. But let me know what they say. Nagnok picked up his quill again. He made a note. Then he looked up and said, with the most unguarded expression Harry had seen from him, your grandmother would have asked the same question, you know. Doria Potter, née Black. She came to Gringotts once and asked my predecessor whether the bank had ever been formally consulted on the blood status legislation. He paused. He told her no. She said that was a significant structural flaw. She was, Nagnok considered the word, accurate. Harry absorbed this. Tell me about her sometime. Perhaps. Nagnok's expression returned to its professional register, but something in it had permanently shifted, a layer of reserve that had quietly dissolved. There is one more matter. The sealed vault in the House Slytherin estate, the one you noted in the initial report. It requires your personal attention before the week is out. It contains documents related to Tom Riddle's original magical education that were sealed by Slytherin inheritance law following the 1981 events. Harry was very still. What kind of documents? Research, Nagnok said carefully. Into a specific type of dark magic. The vault is sealed against anyone without Slytherin heir status, which until 4 days ago meant they were effectively permanently inaccessible. He paused. I would strongly recommend you review them before Riddle returns to full power. Which, based on the intelligence we have, Nagnok was not a creature who showed uncertainty, but something careful moved through his next pause, maybe sooner than the wizarding world currently assumes. The room was quiet. How soon? Sirius asked from the corner, and his voice had lost its easy register entirely. Within 2 to 4 years, Nagnok said. The specific mechanism of his survival, and he did survive, that much the bank's intelligence confirms, is complex and requires time to reverse. But it is reversible, and he will make the attempt. He looked at Harry. You need to understand what he is before he is fully himself again. The vault contains that understanding. When? Harry said. Tomorrow, Nagnok said. If you're willing. Yes. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then, he's coming back. Yes, Harry said. And you knew this was coming. I knew it was possible. Now I know it's probable. Harry paused. It changes the timeline on some things. Not the direction. He looked at Sirius. It doesn't change anything we've done today. What was built today was the right structure regardless of Voldemort. Britain needed the constitutional foundation independent of the threat. He paused. But knowing the threat is real and dated changes how quickly we need to build everything else. Sirius looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man who has spent 8 years in Azkaban and has emerged to discover that the enemy he'd thought was gone was simply delayed. It was a specific kind of expression, grief, briefly, and then the absolute departure of grief in favor of something colder and more useful. Then we build faster, Sirius said. Yes, Harry said. We do. They left Gringotts in the early afternoon and emerged into a Diagon alley that had changed its quality over the course of the morning. The news had traveled the way magical news does, faster than owls could account for, through the specific channels of a community that is small enough that everyone knows someone who was in the chamber or knows someone who knows someone. People were standing in clusters outside shops, the profit spread between them, talking with the particular intensity of people trying to form opinions about something that has moved faster than opinion forming usually allows. Harry walked through the alley and people looked at him. Not all of them, most of the afternoon crowd were caught up in their own conversations and didn't register a small boy in a good jacket. But some of them did, and when they did, their reactions ran across a spectrum that Harry found genuinely interesting. An elderly witch outside Flourish and Blots looked at him and pressed her hand briefly to her heart, a gesture he didn't have words for but understood instinctively. A wizard of about 30, well-dressed, clearly someone's version of an important person, looked at Harry with the specific expression of someone recalculating something they'd been comfortable about and not liking the answer. 2 small girls, maybe 6 years old, being walked by a young woman who might have been their mother, pointed at Harry and said something to each other that made them both dissolve into the uncomplicated laughter of children who found the world consistently hilarious. Sirius walked beside him and seemed to be discovering, with every step, the specific pleasure of walking through a city that had nothing to do with you anymore in any institutional sense, a free man's relationship to streets and air and afternoon light, the profound ordinariness of it, the profound worth of that ordinariness. Florian Fortescue, Sirius said, stopping at the ice cream parlor. I haven't had ice cream in 8 years. Then we should fix that, Harry said, and they went in. They sat at a table by the window and ate ice cream. Sirius had chocolate, 2 scoops, with the focused enjoyment of someone consuming something that has become symbolic as well as actual, and Harry watched the alley outside and thought about Voldemort, and about the vault he'd visit tomorrow, and about the fracture in the world that 400 years of dormant sovereignty had allowed to widen. He thought about the constitutional document Andromeda was going to write and what it needed to contain. He thought about Peter Pettigrew, somewhere in the world in rat form, and about the truth that needed to be on the official record. He thought about the circlet in his pocket, warm against his ribs, and about what Slytherin had written, "Be the thing you are," completely. He was being it. He was being it completely, and the world was adjusting to that with the complicated, uneven, very human process of adjustment, some people embracing it, some resisting it, most doing the complicated mixture of both that honest people do when the world they understand is asked to expand. You're planning something, Sirius said, watching him. Always. Specific or general? Both. Harry paused. Pettigrew first. He has to be found and tried, not just for you, though primarily for you, but because the official record still says you killed him and that record is wrong and wrong records breed wrong history. He looked at Sirius. I'm going to ask Amelia Bones to open the investigation formally. With my name on the inquiry, which means resources and authority she might not have had otherwise. Sirius was quiet for a moment, the chocolate ice cream temporarily forgotten. What if he's found before he can be taken into custody? He said, and his voice was careful in the way that feelings are careful when they've been thought about for 8 years and have reached a specific conclusion that the speaker is not entirely comfortable with. He'll be taken into custody, Harry said. Not because I have any particular mercy for him, but because a living, talking Peter Pettigrew in an official ministry setting, under Veritaserum, with a full Wisengamot record, is worth infinitely more than anything else. He met Sirius's eyes. He will spend the rest of his life in Azkaban with the full knowledge of what he is on the official record. That's not mercy. That's worse. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, the nod of someone who has chosen the harder version of justice over the easier version of revenge and is going to hold to that choice. All right, he said. You're right. I know. James used to say that too. Was he usually right? Often enough that it was annoying, yes. Sirius picked up his ice cream. What else? Hogwarts, Harry said. I'll be going in 2 years. The school needs to know what's coming through its doors before I arrive, not so they can prepare to manage me, but so we can have an honest conversation about curriculum, about how the house system operates, about what happens when a student holds sovereign authority. He paused. Dumbledore is the headmaster. I think we should have that conversation sooner rather than later. You want to have a sit-down with Dumbledore about your Hogwarts experience. I want to have a sit-down with Dumbledore about several things, Harry said. Hogwarts is one of them. The Horcrux research I suspect is in the Slytherin vault is another. Tom Riddle spent 6 years in that school and Dumbledore knew him, and I think Dumbledore has significant information about what Riddle is and how to address it, and I'd like to pool knowledge rather than operate separately. Sirius stared at him. Did you just call Voldemort's soul fragments Horcruxes? Harry paused. I think that's what the Slytherin vault contains research on. It's what the note in Nagnak's file implied, without using the word. He looked at Sirius. You've heard of them. I've heard them whispered about, Sirius said, and his voice had gone to a different register, dark and serious and old, the register of someone who grew up in a house where dark magic was dinner conversation. Black Family Library. There are books, or there were, some of them got burned, some of them got locked. The concept is, he stopped. Harry, if Riddle made one, he made more than one, Harry said quietly. I think that's what the vault will confirm. He paused. But it's solvable. Everything is solvable if you understand it well enough. Sirius looked at him. He looked at him for a long time, this 9-year-old boy with round glasses eating ice cream in Diagon Alley on the afternoon of the most significant day in magical Britain's history for 4 centuries, talking about the darkest magic in existence with the specific calm of someone who has assessed a very large problem and decided it is within scope. How are you doing? Sirius asked. Not politically, not strategically. The Godfather question. The human question. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the alley, at the people moving through it, at the ordinary afternoon of a world that had just changed in ways most of them were still processing. He looked at his ice cream, which was peppermint and very cold. He thought about the dream this morning, the field and the stone and the land's exhale. He thought about the blue room at Grimmauld Place and the books on the shelf and Creature telling him to eat more and Arcturus's almost smiles and Andromeda's folder at 7:30 and Sirius, eating soup at the kitchen table like someone learning to believe in warmth again. He thought about his parents' faces on the memorial in Godric's Hollow Square, frozen in bronze, and about Effie Potter who would have been over the bloody moon, and Doria Potter who'd asked Nagnak's predecessor the right question, and James who had instincts and Lily who had principles, and 41 fires burning in 41 rooms. I'm good, Harry said, and it was entirely true. Not the small, deflecting good of someone who means I'm fine, stop asking, the real version. I'm genuinely, actually good. He looked at Sirius. I have work to do and people I trust to help do it and a foundation that's now properly built. He paused. That's more than I had a week ago. A week ago you were in a cupboard under the stairs, Sirius said, and his voice was flat and dark with the specific anger of a man who has been cataloging the specific content of that sentence for several days and has not yet found a way to make peace with it. And now I'm not, Harry said simply. I'm not going back, and the people responsible for it will have a legal process to contend with at a time of my choosing, and in the meantime I have ice cream and we're going home. He paused. Is Grimmauld Place home? Can we decide that it's home? Sirius looked at him, and this time the expression didn't manage itself, it arrived fully, unguarded, the grief and the love and the profound specific relief of it, the expression of a man who has been given back something he thought was permanently gone and is only just now, in an ice cream parlor in Diagon Alley, fully believing it's real. "Yeah," Sirius said. "Let's decide that." They walked back through the alley in the late afternoon light, and the alley felt different than it had that morning, or perhaps Harry was feeling it differently, the way places feel different when you've put something difficult down and your hands are free. Outside the leaky cauldron, a small cluster of witches and wizards had gathered around a copy of the evening edition of The Prophet, which was already out, which meant it had gone to emergency print, which meant that by tomorrow morning the entire wizarding world would have read it. Harry could see the headline from across the street without trying: "The King Returns, Wizengamot ratifies sovereignty provision in historic session." Below it, smaller, blood status laws repealed. Illegal imprisonment reform passed. "Who is Harry Potter?" One of the people reading it looked up and saw Harry walking past. He was a young man, maybe 18, student age, with the specific watchful expression of someone who has grown up in a world that told him he was lesser and is now re-evaluating the reliability of that information. He looked at Harry, and Harry looked at him, and some exchange passed between them that was too small for language and too large for description, the specific thing that happens when a change in the world registers in a specific face. Harry nodded at him. The young man nodded back. And then he looked back at the paper, and something in his posture was different, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just the small structural shift of someone standing slightly straighter than they were before. Harry walked on. Grimmauld Place received them with its house warmth, the door opening before they reached it, Creature appearing in the hall with the proprietary air of someone whose household has had a significant day and who has prepared accordingly. "The young master ate something?" Creature demanded. "Ice cream," Harry said. Creature's expression communicated extremely clearly that ice cream was not a meal. "Creature has made dinner," he said. "The old master is already at the table. The Sharp Lady will be here in an hour." Sharp Lady was Creature's designation for Andromeda, which she'd taken without comment as a mark of respect in Creature's specific vocabulary. Harry hung up his jacket carefully, the jacket with the circlet in its pocket, and paused in the hall for a moment. The house breathed around him. The tapestry was in the drawing room, the names stitched in gold, the whole long history of it. His name at the bottom, no death date. The fires of 41 houses burning in their rooms. And somewhere beneath London, beneath the chalk and the deep water, the stone in the valley registering his footsteps in its ancient, patient memory. Tomorrow the Slytherin vault, and the beginning of understanding what Tom Riddle had done to himself in the pursuit of immortality, and what the undoing of it would require. Tomorrow the letter to Dumbledore, and the first formal communication to the Hogwarts board, and Amelia Bones's office for the Pettigrew inquiry paperwork. Tomorrow the letters to the Centaur communities and the Mermaid representatives and Nagnak's consultation with the Gringotts director, and the beginning of the constitutional document with Andromeda, and the Regency Council composition, and all of the vast ongoing work of actually building the thing that had been ratified today rather than simply ratifying it. Tonight, dinner at the table with the people who had become, in 7 days, something that felt enormously like family. Harry went to the kitchen. Arcturus was at the table with his hands wrapped around a cup of tea, looking slightly less immaculate than usual, which on him registered as the aftermath of an important day well survived. He looked up when Harry came in. "The Prophet has it right, more or less," Arcturus said. "Nagnak must have given them the full documentation. There are quotes from Griselda Marchbanks that are, remarkably accurate to what she actually said. She said it loudly enough that the whole chamber heard it," Harry said, sitting down. "Hard to misquote someone that clear." Sirius dropped into his chair across the table. He picked up the bread roll that Creature had placed there with evident purpose and ate half of it in one go, which was the most natural, unconsidered thing Harry had seen him do, not performing freedom, just exercising it, the specific ease of a man returning to his own habits. "She's 93, Sirius said. Griselda Marchbanks. She taught Dumbledore, you know. Examined him personally." He paused. "And she decided not to argue with the shape of things." He looked at Harry. In front of the whole chamber. She decided before I finished the sentence about the circlet, Harry said. I saw it. She'd already made up her mind, she was just waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. What do you think changed her mind? Arcturus asked. Harry thought about it honestly. She's 93. She's seen the Wisengamot go wrong enough times to know what right looks like when it's in the room. He paused. And I think she was tired of waiting for it. The kitchen was warm. Creature moved around the edges of it with his practiced, unobtrusive efficiency, placing things on the table with the satisfaction of a creature doing the work it was made for in a household that had regained its meaning. The front door opened at precisely the hour Creature had predicted, and Andromeda came through it with her coat and her folder and the specific purposeful energy of someone who has already started drafting in their head on the walk over. She sat down, opened the folder, said, I have some structural questions about the sovereignty clause before we eat, and then looked up at Creature's expression and revised, I have structural questions after we eat. Wise decision, Creature said, and served dinner, and the table filled with voices. Later, when the plates were cleared and the conversation had moved through Wisengamot strategy and constitutional structure and the specific bureaucratic challenge of formally establishing a Regency Council before the ministry found a way to contest it, when Sirius and Arcturus had gotten onto the subject of the specific tactical failures of a Quidditch match from 1975 that had apparently been a matter of contention between them for 50 years, when Andromeda had produced a second folder that turned out to be preliminary constitutional notes and was making Arcturus read them while simultaneously defending the 1975 match against Sirius's objections, Harry pushed back his chair and went to the window. The London night was doing what London nights do, glowing, busy, indifferent to individual humans in the way that cities are indifferent, the specific anonymity of a large place that contains multitudes. He could see, if he looked at the right angle, the gap where Grimmauld Place sat invisible to ordinary eyes, a pocket of old magic in the middle of the ordinary world, warm and lit and occupied. He reached into his pocket and took out the circlet. He held it in both hands, just for a moment, in the dark of the window. The metal was warm, as it had been all day, the land's own specific warmth, the warmth of chalk and deep water and old roots. He had spent a week being 9 years old with the weight of 4 centuries on his back, and he had not bent. He had not hidden. He had not been managed or redirected or minimized. He had walked into every room exactly as what he was, and the rooms had, eventually, one by one, adjusted to contain him. But there were so many more rooms. The Slytherin Vault tomorrow. Voldemort in 2 to 4 years. The constitutional document, the Regency Council, the Goblin representation, the Centaur communities and the mermaid negotiations and the half-blood children who deserved a different world than the one they'd been born into. Hogwarts in 2 years. Whatever Peter Pettigrew was currently doing in his rat skin, hiding in a warmth that didn't know what sheltered it. The fracture points in the magical world that 4 centuries of dormant sovereignty had allowed to spread, each one requiring patient, specific, well-resourced attention. He put the circlet back in his pocket. Behind him the table was warm and loud with the voices of people arguing about Quidditch and drafting constitutions and drinking tea, and Creature was making the sounds of a household properly occupied, and the house itself was breathing with the specific satisfied quality of a thing that has been waiting for exactly this. Harry turned back from the window. The 1975 match, he said, sitting back down, what was the score when it ended? Sirius and Arcturus looked at each other with the mutual expression of people who have been waiting for someone to ask the decisive question. 240 to 80, Sirius said. 80, Arcturus said simultaneously, with such a different emphasis on the number that the table laughed, and the kitchen filled with it, and outside the window London went on being London, and somewhere in the deep earth, the land kept its patient, warm record of the day its heir had come home. It was, Harry thought, a reasonable beginning.